Hello and welcome. Today, July 25, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is set to deliver his first State of the Nation address. After being elected as the country's chief executive with 31 million votes, his family is back in Malacanang, 36 years after his father was forced out from power by the EDSA revolution. Later today, he will address Congress and the Filipino people to talk about his administration's programs and policies. I'm Sophia Toma Cruz, and you are tuned in to Raptor's special coverage. As Filipinos await what issues and policies President Marcos will discuss in his first SONA. We have our reporters Bea Cupin, Maria Cepeda, Jairo Baliado, and Dwight De Leon on the ground in the Batasang Pambansa in Quezon City, where the SONA will be held. And Bons Magsambol is reporting from Commonwealth Avenue on the protests that are happening near the SONA venue. We'll dial in with them later. Joining me in the studio is rapper reporter Pia Renada. Also here with us is economist and rapper columnist JC Punong Bayan and Southeast Asia Studies professor and historian Leloy Claudio. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Joining us virtually as well are rapper reporters Lian Buwan and Rambo Talapo. To start off this discussion, let's talk about Congress because while it is the SONA, it also is the opening of the 19th Congress, which happened this morning. So, a few takeaways from that. In the Senate, of course, we have Senate now President, Senator Mig Zubiri, who was elected as Senate President. Of course, we also have in the House, House Speaker Martin Romualdez. And interesting situations in both the House and the Senate, because in the House, of course, we have majority who are allies with Marcos, but it's being led by Lakas CMD. And in the Senate, we have a supermajority of 20 senators. And then we also have a two-person minority and a two-person independent bloc. Your thoughts on that?
I guess this is a continuation of Duterte's time wherein they really boasted large majorities backing them. We could see that political clans and blocs really did unite against with Marcos, behind Marcos, just like they did with Duterte. And obviously hanging on to that promise of a big mandate, right? Like a big margin where he won a lot against Vice President Leni Robredo. So it's a continuation of that. But we also see kind of changing faces also. Like we know that the minority in the Senate is much smaller than it used to be under Duterte. So we only have Risa Ontiveros there and Coco Pimentel, who used to be part of the majority under Duterte. So it's like a change in heads almost.
Yeah.
I think it's just reflective of the fact that this is a majority president, so everybody wants to support the majority president. It's hard to be an opposition legislator at this point because you're effectively telling the majority of Filipinos that you disagree with their position. So it's a kind of gutsy position, and it's also a very lonely position.
Yeah, but of course, expected that many will want to show their support for the president. But I want to ask you, Lola, is it the first time that we're having a supermajority in the Senate with 20 senators part of that?
I'm not entirely sure. I think Pia must know better than I do.
I think that in the Senate before, it's a different situation with the House because the House was really very clearly, right, Duterte nominated. In the Senate, you had a little bit more balance, but towards the end, you could see that Duterte, more people were siding with Duterte, especially when we came into the 2019 elections where not a single opposition candidate won for that round. So it was a consolidation through the years, which penultimately led to Marcos now having this supermajority in both chambers.
Right?
I think the Senate is probably going to still be more independent than the House, though. I think many of the rules of Philippine politics still apply. Like, for example, the Speaker of the House is really an appointed position by the President. The Senate President is not always an appointed position, and it's very clear that the President appointed this cousin as Speaker of the House, Martin Romualdez, because this is the person the President trusts the most. He trusts Martin Romualdez over, say, Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo.
Mm-hmm. Although interesting that it is still Lakas CMD led. So even if there is that trust in Martin Romualdez, there's also Gloria's presence, I guess, looming over everything. Do you see your thoughts on the composition of the Congress and the way that people are grouping themselves?
Yeah, well, actually, Sophia, I'm more interested in the legislative agenda that Marcos Jr. will possibly lay down finally, because many people have been expecting a more detailed and more comprehensive plan for the economy, especially since his inauguration. But up until now, he hasn't laid down that yet. And of course, the composition of Congress right now will be key in pushing that legislative agenda. So we'll see how it goes.
Mm-hmm. Speaking on policies. Maybe we can talk a little bit about the cabinet of Marcos right now. Some interesting things, I guess, to note is that there are some cabinet appointees that aren't allied with Marcos. And Pia, right, there are some, I think it was from the camp of Mayor Isko Moreno specifically, where you have some of these notable appointments. Can you tell us more about that?
So the chief of communications of Isko Moreno is not a cabinet member. So I wouldn't say that it's from Isko's camp. But I guess it's more of looking at the economic team of Marcos. They were, as economists are usually, diba, apolitical. They don't really tell people their political leanings. But we also saw, interestingly, that Arsenio Balisacan, who was serving under the Pinoy administration, is now part of the Marcos administration. So I think it's also in a way an acknowledgement for Marcos that when it comes to economy, right, like you have to be kind of politically blind because you have to choose who's competent and not who's necessarily loyal to you. And we also saw that in Duterte's time, right? Like, I mean, aside from Sonny Dominguez, who's obviously his childhood friend, like a lot of his appointees in the economic team were, like not really rah Duterte, but chosen by Sonny Dominguez and other advisors because of their competence.
Yes, but in the case of Dr. Balisahan, full disclosure, he was my boss before when I was in NED. And we have to note as well the Ilocano card that has been used in his appointment. But this is not to say that, of course, they are not competent. They are very competent. These are former professors of the UP School of Economics, including Ben Jokno, who's finance chief right now. And then you have Philip Medalla, who's heading the BSP. These are very competent, very experienced technocrats. And at least on that score, we can be assured that they will be laying down some sound policies moving forward. But I'm not sure we can say the same with the other appointees in the cabinet.
Right.
Yeah, you also have people like Tony what's her name? Tony
Yulo
Loizaga of DNR, and you have Rafael Lotilla. Lotilla is, of course, also from UP Diliman, law professor there. He was previously energy secretary under the Arroyo regime, and he was previously floated as a possible candidate for Supreme Court Chief Justice. So very competent, at least in these technical arms. Although you also have a couple of cabinet appointees who are clearly more like attack dogs, I guess, or were put there in order to defend this presidency, because this presidency is going to have weaknesses, if not now, then in 5 years from now, 3 years from now, and they'll need people they can trust to defend this president.
Right. But I mean, them being competent also, I think one takeaway perhaps is because they've been in past administrations, they're also politically adept and can probably weather those kinds of challenges. Let's talk about the SONA itself. What are your expectations? What do you want to hear from President Marcos' first major policy speech? We can start with Pia.
What we know so far is that, interestingly, the SONA is supposedly written by Marcos himself.
Right.
So, from Vic Rodriguez, the executive secretary, he was saying he spent late last week until Monday morning, this morning, like really finalizing it. He was even disturbed, or parang medyo na-annoying nga daw siya, or parang, I mean, naman annoy, pero there were little events like the ambassadors paying court to him and like presenting their credentials, which got in the way daw of his finalizing his speech, so he had to like kind of go back into the flow. Like they were talking about those things. So it's interesting that he wrote his own speech, because from what I know of Duterte basically accepted drafts from his communications team, his undersecretaries in the palace, but made heavy revisions. But with Marcos actually like authoring the whole thing from the start, right? Then we can probably say safely that his SONA will be something that really flows from his way of thinking and his priorities. So that'll be interesting to see like what exactly he's thinking at this moment. We also know that it's supposed to be more technical than the inaugural address.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting, and hopefully we can really analyze if indeed he goes into details. Because if you remember the inaugural address, it was pretty vague, a bit motherhood statement. Obviously though, parang pag inaugural address naman, we don't really expect it to be that technical and detailed, but that's why we're hoping.
Yeah, but he did mention in his inaugural address as well that, I mean, he placed the expectation himself, right, that the SONA will be when he gives the direction of his government.
Yeah.
Laloy, what are your expectations? What do you want to hear?
Yeah, I think tama na si JC. I want him to talk about the economy. I want him to talk about the problems related to the economy, like inflation, for example. And I want him to talk about jobs. Because actually, it's not just inflation that's the problem. If you have jobs, and if you have high-paying jobs, then you can kind of weather inflation. So that's one thing that we haven't talked about. The other thing I want to hear from him, this is more of a kind of principle thing, is I want him to actually signal that he won't be his father. Because he's been sending kind of very subtle reassurances that he won't be a dictator. But he hasn't really said that he hasn't said categorically, I'm not going to be a dictator. I don't believe in constitutional authoritarianism because that's what his father believed in, right? And there are indications that he's not a constitutional authoritarian like his father, but it would be nice and reassuring if actually reassured us that he will only seek one term, for example, something that previous presidents have done, right? Even Duterte signaled before that he only wanted one term. Aquino said he only wanted one term. So if he can clarify that, I think that'd be very reassuring, especially for his critics.
Do you think he'll say that explicitly, though, considering, for instance, a lot of the support for him is also harking back to how rule under his father was supposed to be golden?
I think it might be. I think that it might be coded, so we might need to do some parsing afterwards. But it could be something similar to what he said before. Do not this really like awkwardly phrased statement. Do not judge me based on my ancestors, right? So maybe something like that we'll need to parse after the speech.
JC, you did mention, of course, the economy, but maybe you can tell us a bit more about the details that you want to hear, because this is the first time we're going to be hearing details, hopefully, from President Marcos.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that inflation will be mentioned in one way or another. Back in June, it reached 6.1%, the highest since 2018. But at least we know from the news and the analysis that it's actually a lot because of global factors as well. So at least Marcos Jr. has that going for him. But that doesn't mean that he can't do anything about it. He can, for example, push for more targeted subsidies for the poor and other affected sectors. Agriculture as well will be, at least I expect it to be mentioned heavily. For example, he had that very lofty promise of 20 pesos per kilogram of rice, and many people are still expecting that. But we see from the latest data that actually the farm gate price of palay has been increasing in the past couple of months. He also mentioned that he wanted to revive Masagana 99, which was credit. I think Kapia wrote an article about this. It was a failed policy of his father that he wants to convert into Masagana 150. And then, of course, some people are clamoring for the repeal of the rice tarification law, and Marcos Jr. has mentioned that he wants to look into it. And then, of course, you have health issues. Aside from COVID, you have the outbreaks of dengue all over the country. And then the WHO also mentioned monkeypox as a new public health concern internationally. Many issues, economy, health, infrastructure, agriculture. Let's hope that he will mention these.
I just want to tag on something to that, because I think there's a real tension between some of his ministers and Ferdinand Marcos himself with respect to agricultural policy. Because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, most of the economic technocrats, they like rice tarification. But then Marcos Jr. himself, because he's hearkening back to the 1970s, he has this idea that we can only get out of our agricultural rut if we are sustainable domestically, as a kind of like food production as a symbol of nationalism, which he gets from his father. Whereas the technocrats are like, we do whatever we can to get the prices down. If that means importation, we will import. So I wonder how he's going to negotiate those tensions in his speech.
Right. Let's go to Bea Cupin, who is in the Batasang Pambansa, of course. Bea covers Malacanang. Hi, Bea. Can you hear us? Right. Bea, what's happening over there? Can you tell us what the mood is like? If everybody... It's supposed the plenary hall's already on lockdown?
It's 30 minutes to 4 p.m. So we expect the president to arrive almost exactly at 4 na. So actually wala nang signal dito sa House of Representatives. So I'm actually inside the media holding area kasi dito lang may Wi-Fi to connect to the outside world. So I just want to touch on much has been said about the security preparation. And parang entering Batasang Pambansa Batasang Road kanina, parang napansin niyo natin medyo ang dami ng security compared to previous SONA. And I think, the sheer numbers will tell you, di ba, over 20,000 police personnel have been deployed for the first SONA of President Marcos compared to previous SONA. I believe President Duterte first SONA mga 6,000 lang, ganon. So, yun pa lang makikita mo na. I haven't been actually able to talk to a lot of legislators who passed by the North Wing because we had to come here because there was no more signal at the Batasang Pambansa.
Okay. Bea, can you tell us more about what are some of the details that we might expect from President Marcos's first speech? Has the palace given any indication of what might be the issues that will be prioritized?
They have not made official pronouncements of what the speech would prioritize or how long it is, ilang pahina ba. Although the Executive Secretary Victor Rodriguez did say that President Marcos himself is writing his address for today. Kung baka sabi nga nung Friday, parang all weekend daw, and up until Monday morning, he'll be working on speech. But if you look at the 3 previous cabinet meetings, so parang yung heavy indication of the priorities of the Marcos administration. If you recall the first cabinet meeting, I think that really set the tone for the priorities of the Marcos administration. Front and center yung pagbalik to face-to-face classes ng students all around the Philippines, of course, that's headed by Vice President Sara Duterte. Of course, you have the economic plan na kung baga pieces pa lang nabibigay. Kasi yun nga, dapat dito sa SONA ilalahad or i-expound on yung economic plan ng Marcos administration. And of course, food security. Because as we all know, the President himself is Agriculture Secretary. Interim or temporary lang naman daw until makontrol niya daw yung urgent food crisis. So, siguro yun yung that you really expect him, or the obvious thing that you expect him to address. Nabanggit ko rin sa story that I wrote, certainly referred to today, na another buzzword of the Marcos administration now is right-sizing. And nabanggit Rodriguez na parang digitization. And that was something also actually that both Marcos and Sara Duterte emphasized during the 2022 campaign, digitize, improve the internet infrastructure. So it's interesting to see how that will actually translate into more policies. Kasi nga, parang we understand yung grand plan siguro nila, but we don't know yet yung nitty-gritty of the implementation. And I think nabanggit din kanina na yung, of course, the COVID pandemic. And there are a lot of the things, or parang in previously, the discussion of COVID was through the lens of the return to face-to-face classes. Even discussion of boosters was through the lens of face-to-face classes. But of course, the president actually contracted COVID during his first week in office. So we'll see kung ano talagang direction, and especially because he had named an officer in charge of the Department of Health. Wala pang secretary na pinipili. Almost 1 month in position.
Bea, you wanted to ask a question?
Okay. Bea, I just wanted to ask do we have any idea, even just a hint, maybe even since campaign period pa, of what legislative priorities Marcos Jr. might have? Leloy earlier asked me nung behind the scenes kanina na parang, will he mention charter change, for example? Is that something on the table, you think?
If we are to base it on the campaign itself, parang he hasn't really touched on that, and as you would know, parang the opportunities to talk to him, either through sit-down interviews or chance interviews were not as plenty. Although, if I recall right, a lot of his allies, including his cabinet members, have downplayed the urgency of charter change in that context. But from the president himself, we haven't really heard clear position in that aspect. So perhaps we'll hear that also from today's on.
All right. Thank you, Bea. We'll get back to you in a bit. Earlier in the screen, you saw the helicopters arriving already at the Batasang Pambansa. It's 3:32, so around 30 more minutes expected until the SONA will start. Let's talk a little. Okay, wait. So, right.
Finish.
There you go. You can see it landing. Of course. Okay, let's wait a little bit to see President Marcos step down from that.
Hello.
So, let's see what he is. It's 3:33. So we see security going up to the helicopter to, of course, escort President Marcos. some interesting things to note, of course, about the context, the history of today's State of the Nation address. Marcos, his father, was the first to give a State of the Nation address in Batasan, which was also built during his time. After the old legislative building, of course, was closed, which is now the National Museum, which is also where he gave his inaugural address. Okay, so we see President Marcos is walking towards the building, where he will, of course, be welcomed by the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces. Okay. So, Chief of Staff, Officer in Charge, Centino, of course, is welcoming him now, and he's walking through the honor guard. And at the end of this, we expect to see Senate President Mig Zubiri and House Speaker Martin Romualdez welcome him. There you go. Zubiri and Romualdez welcoming Marcos. And like Bea mentioned, a few weeks ago, Marcos tested positive for COVID. So, of course, now he's able to attend.
He recovered just in time.
He recovered just in time
SONA.
for his first State of the Nation address, which is also the first one that's kind of back to a full-on face-to-face.
Like a normal pre-pandemic version.
Another first.
And I think we saw Sandra Marcos earlier. Oh, and then who else is surrounding him?
So,
Senator Jinggoy Estrada.
I think to many of our viewers, this is like pageantry, but the symbolism is important because this is not the president's house. The
Right.
president is invited here, so
He's
he
a
has to
guest.
be welcomed by the Senate President and the House Speaker.
And in a way, the SONA is really his message to Congress
Yeah.
right.
over and above everything else.
Interesting to note, Senate President Mig Zubiri a while ago mentioned that when Marcos is going to announce, of course, what his priority legislation is, that he said, let's view them in the proper context. This is not the president's wish list, but it is Marcos articulating what the people want.
I tend to disagree with that because Marcos did not articulate policy positions during his campaign. So people elected him not based on these policy positions, but based on certain ideas that they associated with the candidate. So this is going to be a wish list. I'm not saying it's going to be a bad wish list, but it definitely is a wish list, and that's what the SONA is. It's definitely a wish list. And well, if the president is talking to the House, then it's an utos. For the senators, it's more of a wish list.
Okay, so now he's, of course, in the holding room, and we see that the first family, well, Arnetta Marcos and his son, Sandro Marcos, are present in the room with him. Pia, this wasn't, I mean, compared to Duterte, this is more of a family affair.
So with Marcos Jr., like family is really front and center. And in fact, this is the first time since Fidel Ramos where we have a first lady, like an official first lady. That's why it's interesting, kind of unfamiliar visuals where you have a first lady right beside the president the whole way. In a way, see Duterte, the most common person beside him was always Bongo. And I mean, so you could call him the first lady, or he was constantly present. But ito first time talaga na a family member is really taking also a front seat to these kinds of ceremonies.
I think she intends to be a very active first lady at that, or a very powerful first lady. She's not going to be a first lady who's just going to sit in the sidelines. She wants this presidency to be successful, or to at least sail as smoothly as possible. That by all indicators, that's what she wants to do.
Speaking of a family affair, though, noticeably absent in the room, but of course not in the Batasan Pambansa, Amy Marcos, the sister. Are you surprised by that?
Absent here?
I mean, in the room.
Oh, right.
She was there.
She was there?
I
She
saw
was inside
her.
the room?
Yeah, she followed behind. She was wearing a gray terno.
So, okay. Let's go to Lian Buan, who's with us virtually.
Hi, Sophia. Hi, Pia, JC, and Leloy.
Hi,
Hi.
Lian.
Hi.
Lian, you covered President Marcos on the campaign trail, of course, when he was a candidate. What are your expectations from him today when he delivers his, again, first major policy speech?
Well, if we were to, based on the past sonas of other presidents, like for example, Pinoy named his ombudsman during SONA, and there are still a lot of empty cabinet posts in the Marcos cabinet. So I'm kind of on the edge of my seat waiting to see if he will announce his health secretary later. Of course, the entire board of the Commission on Human Rights is also still empty. And another consequential agency for him, there is no chair or commission of the PCGG, which is very connected to the Marcos family. And other than that, people have been asking me like, how do you think how long it will last? And I always say that I think we are now heaving a sigh of relief that this is it, the third day. So I expect it's going to be following a script, so it's not going to be that long. And I think I also would want to say that I think medyo bumaba na rin naman yung standards natin since President Duterte. So I think we're also expecting na walang magmumura, walang magpapangako na may papatayin siya. So those are the very bare minimum optimism from side of my sector, which is the human rights community. But other than that, I think a lot of people are keeping an open mind. There have been some positive outlooks, especially toward human rights and accountability. Of course, marami yung pessimistic dyan, or even parang not very trusting of his actuation so far. But I think a lot of people are keeping an open mind about what he will say later.
Right. On that note, though, on human rights, of course, and human rights having to be upheld, of course, on the background of all of this is a culture of impunity that we see has flourished and is not gone, even if Duterte has left office. And we saw that yesterday. JC, you tweeted something about the shooting incident in Ateneo. You said we had a preview today of the real state of the nation: polarization, violence, and impunity. Talk more about that.
Well, it's a sad thing. It's a tragic thing to see that happening the day before Marcos Jr.'s first ever SONA. And it just goes to show how far we've fallen in that regard. And you can also see that from the discourse on social media, with some people actually praising the suspect, the one who killed 3 people yesterday. So I guess there's this deep underlying current in our society that manifests in these kinds of incidents. And let's see how that will change under the Marcos Jr. administration.
Mm-hmm. Lian, can you
Sophia,
give us... Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted for every Filipino to remember these numbers. We are coming off of 6 years of President Duterte, 1,000 drug suspects killed under the context of the war on drugs, 427 human rights defenders killed in 6 years, 66 lawyers, that is more than all the presidents before him, including Marcos Sr. combined, and 28 mayors and vice mayors killed. That is the state of impunity that President Duterte has left. President Marcos sold himself in the campaign as a continuity candidate, and being a continuity candidate makes a lot of people scared about how he will treat human rights and how he will try to end impunity. And I guess that's why the human rights community is also very anxious to hear his thoughts on that, because he hasn't made any stance on that. He didn't mention a single word of human rights in his inaugural speech, and all the statements about human rights have been through diplomats so far. So I just hope we remember all those numbers.
Speaking of continuity, Pia, of course, we're coming off of 6 year, Duterte's 6 years. Do you think that Marcos is expected to stay the same, or what might that continuity look like under Marcos?
Mm-hmm. So, in terms of parang just going back to Duterte and like his main priorities, like the drug war, if we look at Marcos, he himself has not really spoken of the drug war in his presidential remarks or even in his press conferences, but his cabinet members have. So, for example, DILG Secretary Benhur Abalos has promised that the drug war would be just as just as much as a priority under this new administration. We also know that the current PNP chief is a Duterte boy, in the sense that Davao police person to, like close aide of Duterte's back in Davao, led the Tokhang in Davao, pretty much, parang namana ni Marcos ang isang PNP chief who served under Duterte and who was very close to Duterte, even on a personal level. But other than that, no, parang we see that Marcos himself has not really spoken of things like charter change, which was also Duterte in a way pursued for a while, like in the first few years. He's not talking about federalism. He's not talking about death penalty. But what he is talking about are, I guess, things that are more on people's minds, like the economy, the pandemic, and yeah. So we'll see if that will change this time around in the SONA. Siguro I'd also like to compare, no, like we're coming from a President Duterte who gave SONAs that were usually 2 hours long. Like this, the shortest was 50 minutes. And we also know that Duterte always ad-libbed, and the craziest it got was in 2017, where he had like 25 curse words. Siyempre, I counted the curse words in his speeches. And he really liberally attacked critics in his SONA. But aside from that, no, Duterte also made very key policy declarations in his SONA. Like in the first one, that's when he declared the unilateral ceasefire with the communists. And we know how that issue evolved during his presidency. So we'll really see if Marcos will also use his SONA as a key platform to make a policy declaration, and it'll be very exciting to see, diba, like what level of priority, what words he uses to describe what he wants to accomplish in the next 6 years.
Mm-hmm. Yung idea of continuity candidate, continuity president, I don't really think it's continuity in terms of policy. I think it's continuity in terms of branding, and it's continuity in terms of he's signaling to the Duterte supporters na kakampi ko si Digong as opposed to anything else. And I think that's what yun yung tumunog sa mga botante. It's not really, they weren't really thinking policy because there was no policy. So this idea that we belong to the same broad camp of strong leaders. Right. I think that's all we mean when we say continuity candidate, and maybe the idea that he will not allow for the prosecution of Rodrigo Duterte in the ICC. The other disjuncture here, of course, is the fact that when Duterte delivered his first State of the Nation address, there were lots of killings going on in Metro Manila at that time. That was a particularly brutal period for Tokhang. And I think, this is a very low bar. I'm glad that we're not talking about thousands and thousands of killings as this president delivers his first SONA.
Right. Let's go to Rambo, who is with us. Or before we go to Rambo, Lian, can you, interestingly enough, a few days before the SONA, of course, there were rumors that Executive Secretary Vic Rodriguez resigned, of course, which he denied. But can you tell us more about that? Where did these come from, and how did he respond to that?
Well, I just saw the Executive Secretary Vic Rodriguez earlier on the feed, and it's really interesting kasi ang aga sa administrasyon na magkaroon ng resignation rumors. And we have to note also that some of the criticisms being hurled against Attorney Vic Rodriguez is coming from the bloggers, like Thinking with Pinoy, for example. And one would have to wonder, like, sino yung kakampi or who is in the same side as Thinking Pinoy, diba? And yung mga dynamics, the conflicts between the inner circle is not new. We've heard it during the campaign. Of course, you have some rumblings about the First Lady Lisa Araneta not being totally on the same page with the sister Senator Amy Marcos, and then you still have that na meron ganun ulit na faction. But I mean, it's factions inside Malacanang are not new. Meron din yan si Pinoy, meron din kay President Duterte, but it's coming really, really early in the Marcos administration. And interestingly, when the tabloid reports came out that Attorney Rodriguez has resigned, he didn't actually answer if he resigned or was made to resign or offered to resign. All he said was, "I am still the Executive Secretary," which is a lawyer's way of not answering your question. So yun, that's my note when I saw Attorney Rodriguez.
Okay, thank you, Lian. We'll get back to you in a bit. Let's go to Rambo, who's with us. Yeah. Hi, Rambo. Can you tell us what it's been like for Marcos's supporters online, the vloggers? What do they want to hear the president talk about today?
Sophie, alam mo, interestingly, pagkagising ko pa lang kanina, binuksan ko ang YouTube ko at tingnan ko yung mga nakasubscribe ako mga YouTubers and marami talaga sa kanila mga Marcos YouTubers. At naunahan pa nila ang mga media companies, ang mga media. Meron silang appointed time at 3 p.m. sharp. They are going to go live and broadcast kung anong nangyayari sa labas ng batasan, sa loob ng batasan, at saka sa pagdating ni Marcos. So this is really a highly anticipated event for all vloggers. Hindi lang Marcos vloggers, even Fiscal vloggers, even medyo opposition vloggers. This is a really big event because politics is really something that people want to take part in. And especially for Marcos vloggers and his community, kahit anong actually kanyang pwedeng sabihin, matutuwa sila. This is a ceremonial day and Marcos, for the Marcos doctrine, parang isang pagbabalik talaga ito. Nabanggit nyo nga na kauna-unahang SONA dyan sa batasan ay sa tatay ni Marcos. Si Marcos mismo, ina-expect ko na maglalagay na naman sila ng parallel dyan na si Marcos Jr. pagkatapos ng exile ng kanilang pamilya, bumalik siya sa batasan at nireclaim ang kung anong dapat sa kanilang pamilya. So kung ano man ang sasabihin niya, kahit matalisod man siya dyan, kahit magkamali siya sa kanyang SONA, ang gagawin ng mga vloggers at saka ng kanyang community, especially yung mga loyalista, kahit anong sabihin ni Marcos, they are going to spin it and actually celebrate it. Marcos is a president who built his name on his father's name at ipagkita rin ni Leloy na gusto niyang ina-expect ni Leloy or Leloy is looking forward to Marcos denouncing it. But itong community ni Marcos, as long as Marcos still is in the likeness of his father, mas matutuwa sila kasi meron talagang nostalgia at saka babalik doon sa tatay niya. At napakagandang pagtingin sa tatay niya. So si Marcos ngayong araw, isang araw ng celebration talaga itong SONA para sa kanila, Sophia.
Interesting though, because you wrote a story a few weeks ago, of course, talking about the vloggers and how they said that they would go pro, and part of them going pro, of course, was having this code of ethics to not to be more objective. And I guess today you're seeing, well, the first signs of how that's playing out. Would you say so far that they're sticking to what they said that they would do a few weeks ago?
Sophia, nakikita natin na talagang mas nagiging masipag sila kasi napakaraming content na pwedeng lumabas sa Marcos family. Natapal natin ito sa ating documentary. Itong Marcos family is really a gold mine. Palaging merong ganap sa kanila. Meron silang rich political history, rich history of lies and corruption and killings, but it's still a rich history that they can exploit for content. Ngayong araw, expect a lot of fan cams of Marcos, of Sandro Marcos, of Imelda, of Aimee, of the First Lady. It's a goldmine for content, and in the Marcos world, napakaraming lalabas dyan na videos. Everything that will enforce the narrative that the Marcoses were exiled and they are now coming back in power and reclaiming what is rightfully theirs. Sophia?
Rambo, thank you so much. We'll get back to you. So of course, on the one side, you have Marcos's supporters, but let's go to Bonds, who is in Commonwealth Avenue right now, where protests are taking place. Bonds, can you tell us what's going on?
Hi, Sophia. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, dito tayo ngayon sa Commonwealth Avenue, no? Malapit tayo sa Ever Protesco Mall, kung saan ideally during the past, SONA, umaabot dito yung mga rally. Pero this year, itong first SONA ni President Marcos, hindi umabot dito. Yung rally, tumigil lang siya sa Tanggap Sora kanina at nag-start siya ng 9 a.m. hanggang 12 noon. So tumigil na yung rally, start 12 noon. Sumunod yung bayan dito sa napagkasundaan nila with the local government unit ng Quezon City. So yun, wala pang nilalabas ng police estimate kung ilan yung sumali dito sa rally, pero masasabi natin sa observation ng media, around 1,000 yung sumali dito. During the past na actually, mapapansin natin na yung mga pinag-protesta nila, yung mga hiling nila is same rin, pero dito siguro yung standout is yung hiling nila na sana mapababa yung presyo ng mga bilihin ng gasolina. Actually, both ka, whether supporter ka or hindi ka supporter ni President Marcos, isa yung hiling nila. Ito yung sana mapababa yung presyo ng bilihin at saka presyo ng gasolina.
Standout din siguro sa hiling nila yung ligtas na balik sa eskwela. Kasi kung matatandaan mo, naging vocal yung administration ni President Marcos na kailangan natin ibalik sa paaralan yung mga estudyante for face-to-face classes, no? So kanina yun yung sinasabi nila. Wala pa kasi health protocols in place kung ano yung gagawin kapag nag-resume na yung classes ng face-to-face by November 2. So yun yung hinayin nila.
Once may imposition daw na hanggang 12 lang yung mga protests, where did that, can you tell us where that came from?
Okay. For context, ito kasi mga anti-Marcos supporters, nag-apply sila ng permit last week para makapag-conduct ng protest. So initially, dinisapprove to ng local government ng LGU. So nag-reappeal sila nung Friday. So hindi, declare kasi na no running zone yung buong Commonwealth Avenue. So nag-reach sila ng compromise na hanggang 9 to 12 lang gagawin yung rally at hanggang dito lang sa Tandang Sora.
Right. So quick time check, it's 3:54. President Marcos is walking to the plenary hall. Just a quick, Lian, if you're still there, just a quick note. Now, this is, of course, a little bit unique this time about the protest because nung una pinagbawalin sila to protest along, for opposition groups to have a protest. What do you think of this, Lian? Is this them taking extra precautions that are unnecessary?
Certainly, what the moves that were deployed were rare. They're not unprecedented, but very rare. Like, for example, the 20,000 overall contingent for the entire Metro Manila was the highest it has been since Aquino and Duterte. We don't know Arroyo's numbers. 15,000 yung pinakamarami kay President Duterte, 10,000 yung pinakamarami kay President Aquino. Yung declaring Commonwealth as a no rally zone, that happened last with President Arroyo pa, according to Renata Reyes of Bayan. Kaya very rare yung moves na to. That's why the progressive groups are saying, why so insecure when you supposedly have the mandate of the majority of Filipinos, which are 31 million people. But as Bon said, it was actually Mayor Joy Belmonte who overruled the PNP, and she was the one who granted the permit to stage a rally in Commonwealth. Pero sabi nga ni Bon's limited sa Tandang Sora. Yung hanggang 12, I think this has been happening. I think this is because there's a pandemic. This has been happening since 2020 to 2021 na walang simultaneous rally habang nangyayari yung SONA. Instead ay magkakaroon na lang ng rally sa umaga. But I think the progressive groups are still holding viewing parties with the SONA at 4 p.m. later. Ngayon yung mga nagtataka kung magkakaroon ba ng Duterte repeat where the president will go out of Batasan and meet with the progressive leaders. There are no indication to that whatsoever, and base sa rekomendasyon ng NTF-ELCAC na hindi pagpatuloy ang peace talks, President Marcos is slated to be the first president after his father not to resume peace talks immediately after winning. So there is no warm relations in that matter to Sophia.
Right. Lian, we'll get back to you in that because seeing on screen right now, of course, President Marcos entering the plenary hall soon. So let's also see who's in the plenary hall. So just a little bit of a time check. 3:57. The SONA should start very soon. And
you can actually see Marcos Jr. trying to limber up before he walked up that ramp.
So, of course, interesting direction, of course, it's Paul Soriano who is directing Marcos' SONA.
Here's the cinematography.
Here you go, right.
I hope no more close-up shots like
from the nose,
brilliant.
under the nose, remember that.
I think he's still going to be partial to shots from below, though. It's what I'm sensing now because they want to make him look big and imposing.
Interesting as well, some of the optics that we're seeing right now. The president, of course, is from Luzon. Martin Romualdez, his cousin, is from Visayas, and Mig Zubir from Mindanao. So if we're talking about unity, there's that.
You're the senator. Senator Angara, Senator Racco, Joel Villanueva,
Senator
Lauren Negarda.
Binay.
Senator Binay, Senator Joel Villanueva, who is now Senate Majority Leader. Yes, and again, Paul Ciano, of course, is directing Marcos's first SONA. Again, so a while ago, we saw that the members of the first family were with him inside the waiting room. Lala, I want to ask you, NP, of course, in Duterte's time, there's always news on whether or not his family would attend, lalo na Sara, but of course, she's here now as Vice President. And Marcos's first family has been consistently visible. So just a quick takeaway about what you think that means.
Well, I think first and foremost, they're grooming Sandro Marcos to be the next Ferdinand Marcos. So he has to be there. The other kids are there, of course, but there's only one namesake. So it's a kind of this idea of royal continuity. I mean, the Marcoses trade on this idea that they're a kind of royal family of the Philippines. So of course, that dynamic is going to be front and center for this SONA because this is the moment where they reclaim the throne.
The Senate, the joint session.
There we
is
go. It's
called
about to
order.
begin.
On the part of the House of Representatives, the joint session is called to order. Please rise for the singing of the Philippine National Anthem to be led by the Samiwang Singers of Ilocos Norte.
Bayang magiliw, pelos ng silanganay, alam ng puso, sa dilim mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiting, sa mandulupi, di ka pasisigil, sa dagat at bundok, sa simoyan, sa langit mong bughaw, may dilagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tamo, ay nanagniningning, ang bituin at araw niyang kailan, pang may di magdidilim, lupa ng araw narwal, at itpog sinta, buhay ay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya na pag may mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Please remain standing for the nation's prayer.
Aming manlilikha, tagapagbigay buhay at liwanag ng sangkatauhan. Salamat po sa iyong pagtangkilig at paggabay sa bansang Pilipinas. Salamat po sa kalayaang magtipon tulad ngayon ayon sa talaga ng aming saligang batas.
Salamat po na kami dahil sa kabayanihan, pagsisikap at sakripisyo ng aming mga ninuno at mga bayani ay nabuo upang maging isang bansa at isang malayang demokratikong republika. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin.
Pagpalain niyo po ang aming pagtitipon ngayon upang aming dinggin, liwanagan at suriin ang kalagayan ng bayan, ang state of the nation. At upang italaga sa inyong gabay at tangkilik ang mga magiging hakbangin ng pamahalaan sa pangunguna ng aming Pangulo, Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr.
Biyayaan niyo po kami, mga mamamayan at mga namumuno, ng patuloy at tumitibay na pagkakaisa, pagtutulungan at pagmamahalan bilang pagsunod sa inyong mabuti at magandang kalooban.
Kasihan niyo po ang aming Pangulo at ang pangkat ng kanyang mga tagapangasiwa, ang aming mga mambabatas, ang aming mga hukom, at ang mga tagapagpairal ng katarungan, ng dalisay at ibayong kaliwanagan, karunungan, katuwiran, at katapatan sa kanilang banal na tungkulin.
Patuloy niyo kaming turuan
At atakayin kaming lahat na mga mamamayan at mga pinuno tungo sa dakilang pagkakaisa na magbubunga ng ibayong kapayapaan, kaayusan, kaunlaran, kasaganaan, at kasiyahan ng lipunang Pilipino.
Magpatuloy po tayo sa personal na panalangin. Mangyaring ang bawat isa ay tahimik na manawagan sa may kapal.
Ladies and gentlemen, honorable members of the Congress of the Philippines, His Excellency Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr., President of the Republic of the Philippines.
Vice President Sara Zimmerman Duterte, former Presidents Joseph Ejercito Estrada, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, and Rodrigo Roa Duterte, Senate President Juan Miguel Zubiri, and the honorable members of the Senate, House Speaker Ferdinand Martin Romualdez, and the honorable members of the House of Representatives, Chief Justice Alexander Gesmundo, and the honorable justices of the Supreme Court, the Apostolic Nuncio, Most Reverend Charles John Brown, and the esteemed members of the Diplomatic Corps, the honorable members of the Cabinet, our First Lady, Luis Araneta Marcos, and our children, distinguished guests, ang mga minamahal kong mga kababayan, ladies and gentlemen, magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. I come before you today to address you as it is my duty as President of the Republic. We live in difficult times brought about by some forces of our own making, but certainly also by forces that are beyond our control. But we have, and we will continue to find solutions, and these are some of them. In terms of the economy, we will implement a sound fiscal management. Tax administration reforms will be in place to increase revenue collection. Expenditure priorities will be realigned and spending efficiency will be improved to immediately address the economic scarring arising from the effects of COVID-19 and also to prepare for future shocks. Productivity-enhancing investments will be promoted. Our country must become an investment destination, capitalizing on the corporate recovery and tax incentives for enterprises with the CREATE law and the economic liberalization laws such as the Public Service Act and the Foreign Investments Act. Ecozones will be fully supported to bring in strategic industries such as those engaged in high-tech manufacturing, health and medical care, and all emerging technologies. This is also seen to facilitate economic growth outside of Metro Manila. Our tax system will be adjusted in order to catch up with the rapid developments of the digital economy, including the imposition of value-added tax on digital service providers. The initial revenue impact will be around 11.7 billion pesos in 2023 alone. Tax compliance procedures will be simplified to promote ease of paying taxes. We will pursue measures to determine possible undervaluation and/or trade misinvoicing of imported goods. Through information and communications technology, the Bureau of Customs will promote streamlined processes. Disbursements for 2022 to 2023 will be maintained at above 20% of gross domestic product, or 4.955 trillion pesos and 5.086 trillion pesos respectively, to ensure continuous implementation of priority programs. Disbursement will further increase over the medium term from 5.402 trillion pesos, or 20.7% of our GDP in 2024, to 7.712 trillion pesos, or 20.6% of GDP in 2028. The medium-term fiscal strategy of this administration seeks to attain short-term macro-fiscal stability while remaining supportive of the country's economic recovery and to promote medium-term fiscal sustainability. Furthermore, and more importantly, fiscal policy aims to bring together the national government's resources so that these are mobilized and utilized in order to gain the maximum benefit and the high multiplier effects for our economy. Measurable medium-term macroeconomic and fiscal objectives include the following headline numbers. These are based on forecasts that are consistent with the guiding principles of coherence of strategies, policy discipline, and fiscal sustainability. 6.5 to 7.5% real gross domestic product growth in 2022. 6.5 to 8% real GDP growth annually between 2023 and 2028. 9% or single-digit poverty rate by 2028. 3% national government deficit to GDP ratio by 2028. Less than 60% national government debt to GDP ratio by 2025. At least $4,256 income per capita, and the attainment of upper middle income status by 2024. The aforementioned headline goals summarize the objectives of this medium-term fiscal strategy being submitted to Congress for its adoption and concurrence to the concurrent resolution by the Senate and House of Representatives. Once adopted, the MTFF will become an anchor for the annual spending and financing plan of the national government and Congress when preparing the annual budget and undertaking related appropriation activities. It is therefore a forward-looking document that extends beyond the traditional 3-year horizon to reach 6 years, coinciding with the 6-year coverage of the Philippine Development Plan 2023 to 2028. The MTFF also promotes transparency and credible commitment to pursue the indicated socio-macroeconomic goals that optimize the government budget. Medium-term growth targets and the assumptions regarding key macroeconomic variables underpin the medium-term fiscal plan. The recent past and the COVID-19 pandemic has beset the macroeconomic environment with challenges and a series of external shocks. Inflation has accelerated in recent months due largely to significant increases in international prices of oil and other key commodities. Still, the economic growth momentum remains firm, as demonstrated by the strong 2022 first quarter GDP growth at 8.3%. However, the recovery process from the impact of the pandemic is still ongoing, amid elevated uncertainty in the international economic environment. Revisions in the macroeconomic assumptions incorporate these challenges and most recent economic developments, leading to upward adjustments in the following: inflation rate for 2022 to 2023, foreign exchange rate for 2023 to 2025, and goods and services imports growth for 2022. The economy is expected to grow by 6.5 to 7.5% this year as we continue to reopen the economy while considering the recent external developments. In the first quarter alone, GDP saw an increase in household consumption and private investments, along with a robust manufacturing industry, high vaccination rate, improved healthcare capacity, and an upward trend in tourism and employment. This is expected to continue for the rest of the year. The strong economic growth is projected to be sustained and expanded further to 6.5 to 8% from 2023 until 2028. The average inflation for 2022 is projected to range from 4.5 to 5.5%, following the uptick in fuel and food prices as a result of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict and the disrupted supply chains. It is slightly adjusted to 2.5 to 4.5% in 2023 and is seen to return to the target range of 2.0 to 4.0% by 2024 until 2028. Dubai crude oil price is expected to settle at 90 to 110 US dollars per barrel in 2022, 80 to 100 US dollars per barrel in 2023, and 70 to 90 US dollars per barrel from 2024 onwards, as oil supply is expected to catch up and stabilize over the medium term. The Philippine peso is projected to average between 51 to 53 pesos per US dollar in 2022 and 51 to 55 pesos per US dollar from 2023 onwards due to aggressive monetary policy tightening by the US Federal Reserve, market aversion amid the Russian-Ukraine conflict, and again, increased global oil prices. Lastly, exports of goods are expected to grow by 7% in 2022 and 6% from 2023 to 2028. On the other hand, imports of goods are projected to grow by 18% in 2022, 6% in 2023, and 8% from 2024 to 2028. I have instructed the NEDA to coordinate with other agencies and work on the Philippine Development Plan for 2023 to 28 and to submit to me the complete blueprint and progress of its implementation not later than year-end. One of the main drivers of our push for growth and employment will be in the agricultural sector. With regard to food supply, we are confronted by a two-pronged problem: that which will hit us in the short term and that which will hit us in the long term. Tayo ay nahaharap sa mga problemang kagyat nating mararamdaman at mga hamong pangmatagalan. Ang mga suliraning agarang mararamdaman ng ating mga kababayan ay ang posibilidad ng tuloy-tuloy na pagsipa ng presyo ng pagkain at kakulangan sa supply ng ating pagkain. Upang masuportahan ang mabimili para mapanatili ang kanilang purchasing power o kapangyarihan sa pagbili, isinapinal ng Department of Agriculture ang planong taasan ang produksyon sa susunod na panahon ng pagtanim o planting season sa pamamagitan ng tulong pinansyal at teknikal. Magbibigay tayo ng pautang habang mas ilalapit natin sa sektor ng agrikultura ang hindi gaanong mahal na farm inputs na bibilhin na ng bulto ng gobyerno. Kabilang dito ang abono, pestisidyo, mga punla, feeds, fuel subsidy, at ayuda para sa mga karapat-dapat na benepisyaryo. Para sa pangmatagalang solusyon, Itataas natin ang produksyon ng mga kalakal at produktong pang-agrikultura. At para magawa ito, pagtitibayin natin ang tinatawag na value chain na nagsisimula sa mga magsasaka hanggang sa mga namimili. May mga bahagi ng value chain na sa ngayon ay kanya-kanya ang operasyon. Pagtibayin natin ang koordinasyon ng iba't ibang bahagi nito. Ang pagsasaliksik para sa mga makabagong paraan at ng pagtatanim at pag-aalaga ng hayop ay masusing gagabayan ng Department of Agriculture. Ang produksyon ng farm inputs o mga kakailanganin ng mga magsasaka sa pagpapalago ng kanilang sakahan ay ating iaayon sa mga hamong dala ng climate change at global warming. Mahigpit na pagsusuri ang gagawin ng ating mga eksperto tungo dito. Ang mga pautang at financial assistance sa mga magbubukid at mangingisda ay magiging institusyon at patakaran ng aking administrasyon. Ipapaprioridad natin ang modernisasyon ng mga sakahan sa pamamagitan ng mga makabagong teknolohiya para sa ating mga magsasaka. Atin palalawakin ang mga palaisdaan, babuyan at manukan. Lahat ng ito gagamitan ng siyensya para tumaas ang produksyong agrikultural. Maging ang post-production at processing ay susuportahan ng pamahalaan. Gagawa tayo ng national network ng farm-to-market road upang mas mabilis na mailakbay ng mga magsasaka ang kanilang mga produkto sa mga pamilihan. At gagawa tayo ng mga paraan upang maramdaman ng mga mamimili ang pagluluwag ng presyo ng mga produktong pagkain sa kayang halaga, gaya ng muling pagbubuhay ng mga Kadiwa Center. Hindi ito magagawa sa isang araw. Hindi magagawa sa isang buwan o isang taon lamang. Ngunit, kailangan na natin simulaan ngayon. Ang Agrarian Reform Program ay dapat magpatuloy. Agrarian reform is not only about acquisition, but also about support services and distribution. To assist this, I intend to issue an executive order to impose a one-year moratorium on the payment of land amortization and interest payments. This is included in Republic Act number 11469 or the Bayanihan to Heal as One Act. A moratorium will give the farmers the ability to channel the resources in developing their farms, maximizing their capacity to produce, and propel the growth of our economy. Civil society organizations also support this because it will unburden the farmers of their dues and be able to focus on improving farm productivity. Congress must also pass a law that will emancipate the agrarian reform beneficiaries from the agrarian reform debt burden, thereby amending Section 26 of Republic Act 6657. In this law, the loans of agrarian reform beneficiaries with unpaid amortization and interest shall be condoned. Layunin ng batas na ito ay burahin ang hindi mabayarang utang ng ating mga magsasaka na benepisyaryo ng agrarian reform. Agrarian reform beneficiaries who are still to receive their awarded land under the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program shall receive it without any obligation to pay any amortization. The condonation of the existing agrarian reform loan will cover the amount of 58.125 billion pesos benefiting 654,000 agrarian reform beneficiaries and involving a total of 1.18 million hectares of awarded lands. Executive Order Number 75, Series 2019, requires that all government agencies, bureaus, departments, and instrumentalities to turn over agricultural lands to qualified agrarian reform beneficiaries. At present, we have a total of 52,000 hectares of unused agricultural lands of the government, which shall now be used for distribution to the following sectors in accordance with Section 40 of the Republic Act number 6657 as amended. Thus, landless war veterans, landless surviving spouse and orphans of war veterans, landless retirees of the Armed Forces of the Philippines and the Philippine National Police. Agricultural lands acquired under this program will be given to graduates of college degrees in agriculture who are landless. The call of the times is for the infusion of fresh and new blood in the agricultural sector. We need a new breed of farmers equipped with modern agricultural technology able to engage in sustained scientific farming that will not only increase farm yields, but also resilience in the face of climate change. They say that each brand has a story. As for the Filipino brand, ours is deeply rooted in our rich cultural heritage, and the tourism sector plays an invaluable role in the promotion of the Filipino brand. Tourism is not only an important economic development tool, but the abundance of opportunities that the sector creates in terms of regular employment and even job creation at the grassroots level is undeniable. To boost our tourism industry, we will first and foremost make basic developments, such as road improvements for easier access to tourism spots. We will also upgrade our airports and create more international airports to help decongest the bottleneck in the Manila airport. We will also make it more convenient for travelers to go around the country, even to remote areas, to help promote undiscovered tourist spots. This program will be led by the Department of Tourism, together with the Department of Public Works and Highways. To foster the Filipino brand is to spark our sense of pride and reaffirm our strong sense of identity. It is time to welcome the rest of the world with an enhanced Filipino brand that is unique, attractive, and creative. The creativity of the Filipino is truly world-class. We excel in arts and culture, new media, live events, avenues which generate primary and downstream jobs for our creative and talented countrymen. Unfortunately, ang mga hanap buhay na ito ang unang pinadapa ng pandemya at ang pinakahuli namang makabalik sa normal. The creative industry likewise faces many challenges, including workplace conditions, working hours, intellectual property rights, and the welfare of our beloved freelancers who were left vulnerable during the height of the pandemic. We require an institutionalized creative industry that will advance the interest of its stakeholders. Sila na nagbibigay ng kaluluwa at pagkakilala sa ating pagka-Pilipino. Protektahan natin sila. The Department of Social Welfare and Development has a large part to play in all of this. Magpapatuloy ang ating pagkalinga sa ating mga kababayan na lubos na nangangailangan. Hindi po natin sila pababayaan. Mangunguna sa pag-aagapay sa kanila ang Department of Social Welfare and Development. Utos ko sa DSWD ang mabilis na pagtugon sa pangangailangan ng mga biktima ng kalamidad at mga iba't ibang krisis. Ang mga field office nila ay inatasan na maagang maglagak ng family food packs at non-food essentials sa mga LGU, bago pa man manalasa ang anumang kalamidad. Magdadagdag tayo ng mga operation center, warehouse at imbakan ng relief goods, lalo na sa mga malalayong lugar na mahirap marating. Titiyakin natin na maayos ang koordinasyon ng DSWD at Department of Human Settlements and Urban Development nang sa ganon, madali ang pagpatupad ng Emergency Shelter Assistance Program para sa mga biktima ng kahit anong kalamidad. Pagtitibayin pa natin ang komprehensibong programang Assistance to Individuals in Crisis Situations o ang ating tinatawag na AICS para maiparating ang tulong sa mas maraming biktima. Hindi natin papahirapan ang mga biktima ng krisis na dudulog sa ahensya. Gagawin nating simple ang proseso ng paghingi at pagparating ng tulong. Dahil hindi naman dapat dinadagdagan pa ang hirap ng nararanasan ng ating mga mamamayan. Upang matiyak na mapupunta sa kwalipikadong mga pamilya ang tulong na pamahalaan sa pamamagitan na 4Ps o Pantawid Pamilya Pilipino Program, titiyakin natin na malilinis ang listahan ng benepisyaryo. Higit na sa 1 milyong pangalan na ang nakapag-graduate na sa listahan. At nagagalak akong mabatid na sila ay nakakatayo na sa kanilang sariling paa. Kaugnay nito ay inutusan ko ang DSWD na pag-ibayuhin pa ang pagrepaso ng listahan upang maitutok ang pamimigay ng sapat na ayuda sa mga lubos na nangangailangang pamilya. Magpapatuloy ang supplemental feeding program para sa mga bata sa child development centers at supervised neighborhood play at lalo pa nating palalawakin sa taong 2023. Hindi rin natin nakakalimutan ang mga solo parents at mga nanay na nahiwalay sa kanilang mga mister dahil sa karahasan. Pagtitibayin natin ang programa sa violence against women and their children. Kabilang na ang counseling para sa mga biktima, katuwang ang ating mga LGU. Tiyakin natin na sapat ang pondo sa halos 70 residential care centers at 7 non-residential care centers para sa vulnerable sectors at persons with disabilities na sumisilong dito. Sa ating sitwasyon ng pangkalusugan, nariyan pa rin ang banta ng COVID-19. Lalo't may mga nadidiskubring bagong variant ng coronavirus. Pero hindi na natin kakayanin ang isa pang lockdown. Wala na tayong gagawing lockdown. Dapat natin balansehin ng maayos ang kalusugan at kapakanan ng ating mga mamamayan sa isang banda at ang ekonomiya naman sa kabilang banda. Nakikipagtulungan ang iba't ibang ahensya ng pamahalaan sa pag-monitor sa mga COVID-19 hospital admission upang makatiyak tayo na may sapat na kapasidad ang ating healthcare system at maiwasan ang pagsipa ng bilang ng nagkakasakit. Patuloy din ang ating vaccine booster rollout para sa ating pangkalahatang depensa. Sa ganitong paraan, kahit pa tumaas muli ang bilang ng mga COVID cases, mananatiling mababa ang bilang ng mga maospital at bilang ng mga namamatay. Sa pamamagitan nito, unti-unti rin tayong masasanay na nariyan ang virus pero hindi na seryoso ang banta sa ating buhay. Iaayon natin ang ating mga health protocols sa kung ano ang ating pangangailangan sa paglipas ng panahon at lalo pang iibayuhin ang kooperasyon kasama ang pribadong sektor upang tumaas pa ang kumpiyansa ng mga mamumunuhan nang sa gayon ay bumalik na tayo sa full capacity, lalo-lalo na ang ating mga negosyo. Pagbubutihan pa natin ang pagpapakalat ng tamang impormasyon ukol sa COVID, kasama ang kahalagahan ng bakuna. Mananatili muna sa ngayon ang alert level system natin. Pinapag-aralan natin ang ibang paraan ng klasifikasyon upang mas babagay sa kasalukuyang sitwasyon, lalong-lalo na sa pagbabago ng COVID. Sa pakikipagtulungan ng Kongreso, itatatag natin ang ating sariling Center for Disease Control and Prevention at ang isang Vaccine Institute. Magtatayo tayo ng dagdag na mga health center at ospital. But beyond the issues that the pandemic has brought, the need for a stronger healthcare system is self-evident. We must bring services, medical services to the people and not wait for them to come to our hospitals and healthcare centers. Napakinabangan natin ng husto ang malalaking specialty hospital gaya ng Heart Center, Lung Center, Children's Hospital at National Kidney and Transplant Institute. Kaya maliwanag na hindi lang dapat dito sa National Capital Region kundi maging sa ibang parte ng bansa. Maliwanag na hindi lamang dapat dito lamang sa National Capital Region, kundi maging sa ibang parte ng bansa, kailangan magdagdag ng ganitong uri ng mga pagamutan. Bukod dito, upang mailapit natin ang healthcare system sa taong bayan, nang hindi sila kailangan pumunta sa sentro ng kanilang bayan, lalawigan o region, ay maglalagay tayo ng mga clinic, mga RHU, na pupuntahan ng mga doktor, nurse, midwife, medtech, 1 beses, 2 beses sa isang linggo. Nang sa ganun, magiging mas madali sa may karamdaman na magpapagamot nang hindi na kailangan magbiyahe ng malayo. One of the cornerstones of a strong healthcare system is the provision of competent and efficient medical professionals. We will exert all efforts to improve the welfare of our doctors, our nurses, and other medical frontliners. Dapat din tayong magkaroon ng sapat na supply ng gamot na kinakailangan sa pang-araw-araw ng ating mga mamamayan. Sinimulan ko na ang pakikipag-usap sa mga kumpanya ng gamot dito sa Pilipinas at sa ibang bansa. Hinihikayat natin na buksan nila ang merkado upang bumaba ang presyo ng gamot. Halimbawa, kung mas marami ang mas murang generic o hindi branded na gamot sa merkado, mas bababa rin ang presyo dahil sa kompetisyon. Ang Department of Trade and Industry ay nakikipag-usap sa mga interesadong manufacturer ng generic drugs na papasok sa ating bansa. Inuutusan ko naman ang Philippine Competition Commission na pantay-pantay dapat at walang kartel sa hanay ng mga pharmaceutical companies. Dahil kapag bukas ang merkado, bababa ang presyo ng gamot para mapakinabangan ng ating mga mamamayan. This is one of the hard lessons that we learned when the pandemic struck, and therefore we must act on that shortcoming. In the educational sector, I believe it is time for our children to return to full face-to-face classes once again. The Department of Education, led by our highly able Vice President Sara Duterte, is now preparing for its implementation in the upcoming school year, with utmost consideration for the safety of students as we are still in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. We must ensure that our classrooms are safe for teachers, for students, and the entire academic community when they return to face-to-face classes. We continue to encourage everyone to get their booster shots in preparation for the resumption of in-person classes. This is one of the reasons I have directed the Department of Health and the Department of Interior and Local Government to undertake another rollout of booster shots. The condition and availability of schoolrooms for our students must also be addressed, again, in coordination with the Department of Public Works and Highways. Though some complications have arisen over the question of repair of school buildings in relation to the Mandanas-Garcia ruling, this will be ironed out. We have been in discussion with local government leaders, governors, and mayors in the last few weeks to determine with the LGUs what is actually practicable, what functions belong to the LGUs, and what belong to the national government. There have also been lengthy discussions on the continuation and viability of the K-12 school system. We are giving this careful review, and all necessary inputs and points of view are now being considered. In the longer term, we are instituting a program of refresher courses and retrainings for our teachers so they can stay abreast of the rapid growth in technology, especially in this post-pandemic world. As for the horror stories that we have heard about the poor quality of educational materials and supplies that are being given to our schools, this must end. Our children must always be equipped with the best that we can provide. Ang edukasyon ay ang tangi nating pamana sa ating mga anak na hindi mawawaldas. Kaya anumang gastusin sa kanilang pag-aaral ay hindi tayo nagtitipid. Hindi rin tayo nagtatapon. And once again, I am not talking about history or what is being taught. I am talking about materials that are necessary for effective teaching in this day and age. Children now need connectivity to the internet. They need devices to use. They need computers, educational tools. So that they might participate fully in the digital community here and abroad. We must do better in the international rankings, especially when it comes to the so-called STEM subjects: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. These skills, this knowledge, are necessary for our young people to be able to compete in a highly technological and competitive world. The raw talent is there in our young people. It is up to our educational system to develop and to refine that great pool of talent. Foreign employers have always favored Filipino employees because of our command of the English language. This is an advantage that we must continue to enjoy. The internet has now become the global marketplace, not only for goods, services, but also for ideas, even extending to our own personal interactions. And the language of the internet, for better or for worse, is English. Therefore, the question of our medium of instruction must be continuously re-examined to maintain that advantage that we have established as an English-speaking people. On a related subject, we are entering an age of exponential adoption of technology. It is the fourth industrial revolution. This will be characterized by the infusion of technology into almost every facet of our lives. Breakthrough technologies in the areas of quantum computing, artificial intelligence, nanotechnologies, the Internet of Things, robotics, self-driving electric vehicles, 3D printing, virtual and augmented realities, among others, that will radically transform the way business is done. The scale and the speed at which these innovations are introduced universally into our everyday lives and activities is unprecedented in our recorded history. We cannot stand idly by. The mission of our Department of Information and Communications Technology is to identify and utilize these innovations to improve governance. It has the daunting task now of transforming our government into an agile bureaucracy that is responsive to the needs of the public. Provide good and solid data to ensure informed decision-making, as well as allow secure and seamless access to public services. The voluminous records stored in the government warehouses and archives have to be digitized. Those that are already stored in various inventories of data should be harmonized and shared across departments and agencies. Needless to say, these have to be kept in large data centers that are secure yet accessible. The national ID will play an important part in this digital transformation. For citizens to be able to seamlessly transact with government, their identity must be easily verifiable. We expect to issue 30 million physical IDs and 20 million digital IDs by the end of this year. The target is to accomplish the issuance of about 92 million IDs by the middle of next year. As the world moves into rapid digitalization, the digital divide will become more pronounced. The depth and breadth at which these technologies will be transformative in our lives is fully expected. This will open new opportunities for the creation of wealth, but will also likely create inequalities. Hence, universal connectivity will be a vital component in order to ensure that no citizen is left behind. I have therefore tasked the DICT to deploy digital connectivity across our various islands. This will be done through the implementation of the National Broadband Plan, the Common Tower Program, connecting our geographically isolated and disadvantaged areas via our Broadband ng Masa project. All relevant modes of digital transport should be utilized. These may be through a combination of terrestrial or submarine fiber optics, wireless, and even satellite technology. As our Public Service Act has opened the doors and removed the restrictions on foreign investment, we foresee an increase in direct investment of overseas players. This will translate into better quality, availability, and affordability of telecommunication services all over the country. We come now to infrastructure. The backbone of an economy is its infrastructure. The infrastructure program of the Duterte administration must not only continue, but wherever possible, be expanded. We shall confidently build on this firm foundation established by my predecessor, as it is in building an edifice. We must keep the momentum and aspire to build better, more. Necessarily, infrastructure development will remain a very high priority in our drive for growth and employment. Once again, I will not suspend any of the ongoing projects, as those have already been shown to be of benefit to the public that they serve. We will continue to study the proposals that have been made. Infrastructure development spending will be sustained at 5 to 6% of GDP. The planned expansion of infrastructure projects, I believe, would be possible if we continue to encourage the participation of the private sector in the development of our programs. Public-private partnerships, or PPPs, hold great potential for that expansion, for infrastructure development, and for innovation. Our infrastructure development is of primary importance as it is a necessary element to improve many other sectors, to include agriculture, tourism, general economic activity, and even to governance. It is my belief also that we have missed some great opportunities to develop our rail transport system. It is clear in my mind that railways offer great potential as it continues to be the cheapest way of transporting goods and passengers. We can build upon already existing lines by modernizing these old railway systems. There are dozens of railway projects on the ground, above the ground, below ground, not just in Manila, but in other regions, at various stages of implementation and with a combined cost of 1.9 trillion pesos. This administration is committed to finish building the current portfolio of investments, approved railway projects such as the North-South Commuter Railway System, the 33-kilometer Metro Manila Subway Project, the 147-kilometer North-South Commuter Railway System, the 12-kilometer LRT-1 Cavite Extension, the 23-kilometer MRT-7, and the common station that will connect LRT-1, MRT-3, and MRT-7. And beyond NCR, larger-scale railway systems like the 102-kilometer Mindanao Railway Project, the Panay Railway Project, and the Cebu Railway System will be integrated as a vital part of our transport and communication systems. We will also continue to improve our roads and transportation systems in key cities throughout the country through various projects, such as the Cebu Bus Rapid Transit, Davao High Priority Bus System, Ilocos Norte Transportation Hub, the El Nido Transport Terminal. My order to the Department of Transportation, or DOTR, is really very simple. Full speed ahead. Improving our railway system, along with modernizing existing airports and seaports, will maximize our strategic location in the Pacific and connect our many islands. A key sector in our transformation plans is that of energy. Another fundamental requirement for growth and increased employment will be the availability of cheap, reliable energy. This even comes under the category of ease of doing business. If we are to attract investors, both local and foreign, to set up shop here in the Philippines. At present, our demand for energy far exceeds our reliable supply. We must increase the level of energy production. We must look at every possible option that would be appropriate for the Philippine situation. There is some room to expand our present power supply through existing power sources, but this is only to a very limited extent. We must build new power plants. We must take advantage of all the best technology that is now available, especially in the areas of renewable energy. Our search for new power sources should always be with an eye to improving the mix of the energy supply between traditional and renewable sources. The technology on renewable energy is progressing rapidly, and many of these technologies are appropriate for the Philippines. We have already begun windmill power, we are now expanding very quickly our solar power production. For both offshore and onshore wind turbines, for example, the World Bank has calculated that there is a potential for 255 gigawatts by the year of 2030. Solar power has steadily increased its efficiency in converting sunlight to electrical power, which is particularly attractive for the Philippines. Because unlike wind power, solar power is practical almost everywhere in the Philippines all year round. In the move to lowering our carbon footprint caused by energy production, our advancement to renewables will have a lead time. In the interim, natural gas will hold the key. We will provide investment incentives by clarifying the uncertain policy in upstream gas, particularly in the area close to Malampaya. This requires clarification of the processes and review of service contracts policy. I believe that it is time also to re-examine our strategy towards building nuclear power plants in the Philippines. We will comply, of course, with the International Atomic Energy Agency regulations for nuclear power plants as they have been strengthened after Fukushima. In the area of nuclear power, there have been new technologies developed that allow smaller-scale modular nuclear plants and other derivations thereof. Once again, PPPs will play a part in support as funding in this period is limited. Furthermore, we must examine the entire system of transmission and distribution for the purpose of finding ways to lower the price of energy to the consumer and to industry. We must expand the network of our transmission lines while examining schemes to improve the operation of our electrical cooperatives. All this in aid of reducing energy costs, especially but not limited to households. All this impetus for development and growth we undertake within the context of accelerating climate change and extreme weather conditions. Though we are a minor contributor to climate change globally, we have the unfortunate distinction of being one of the most vulnerable countries to the effects of climate change. For the welfare of our people, it is incumbent upon us to alleviate the effects of that vulnerability. The use of renewable energy is at the top of our climate agenda. We will increase our use of renewable energy sources such as hydropower, geothermal power, solar, and wind. Geographically, we are a disaster-prone country. Capacity building for our natural disaster resiliency is therefore a must. Investment in science and technology is imperative to enable us to have accurate weather forecasts and on-time disaster alerts. Studies show that already now, many areas in the Philippines are at high risk from the rise in sea levels brought about by the increase in global temperature. We must adapt to this phenomenon with disaster-proof planning for our communities. We will also look into the precarious freshwater supply situation in the country, especially in our urban areas. Many of our water supply systems date back to the 1950s, and they must now be rehabilitated and improved. I've instructed the DNR, together with the DPWH, to explore possible partnerships with the private sector to address this crucial situation. The Philippines has excellent laws on the environment, but we have to guarantee that these laws are properly enforced. And this will require a great deal of coordination and cooperation between concerned government agencies and private stakeholders. Companies who exploit our natural resources must follow the law. We all have the responsibility to preserve this earth, for we are but custodians, and we will pass on this great treasure to future generations. There is no question that the preservation of the environment is the preservation of life. If we cannot mitigate climate change, all our plans for the economy, all our plans for our future will be for naught. Bawat Pilipino sa ibayong dagat na nagsasakripisyong lisanin ang kanyang pamilya sa Pilipinas upang maghanap buhay ay nararapat lamang magkaroon ng pamahalaang matatawag nilang tahanan habang nasa ibang bayan. Ito ang papel na gagampanan ng kagawaran ng manggagawang mandarayuhan o Department of Migrant Workers matapos itong ideklara bilang ganap na ahensya ng gobyerno ng isang taon. Ang kagawarang ito ang magsisilbing kanlungan ng ating mga kababayan sa gitna ng mundong walang kasiguruhan at mahigpit na kompetisyon. Ito ang maglalatag sa kanila ng mga oportunidad. Titiyak na ang kanilang mga hanap buhay ay tugma sa kanilang mga kasanayan. Maninigurong akma ang sahod at maayos ang kalagayan sa kanilang mga kumpanya at mga ngalaga sa kanilang mga pamilya habang sila ay nasa malayo. Gagawin natin ito sa pamamagitan ng pag-aalis ng red tape sa sistema ng pagsusulong ng digital empowerment. We shall automate the verification of contracts and issue secure overseas employment certifications that you can keep on your smartphone. I call on the Department of Migrant Workers and the DICT to make this a top priority. Tinatawagan ko rin ang Department of Foreign Affairs na makipagtulungan sa Department of Migrant Workers na tiyakin ang lahat ng mga diplomatic post ay tutulong na agarang maibalik sa trabaho ang mga ating mga overseas Filipino workers na nawalan ng hanap buhay nitong nakalipas na ilang taon. Mula sa 3 buwan ay gagawin na lang nating 3 linggo para sa isang dayuhang employer na iproseso ang mga papeles ng Pilipinas, ng Pilipinong nais nitong kunin bilang empleyado. Aatasan din natin ang kagawaran ng gawing simple, ang komplikadong handbook ng mga tuntunin at regulasyon para sa mga OFW. Nang sa gayon ay maging malwan ang mga transaksyon may kinalaman sa kanilang pangingibang bansa. Mula sa handbook na may 240 seksyon, ay gagawin nating pamphlet na lamang na hindi hihigit sa 100 pahina. Mahirap na nga ang buhay. Kaya naman, ayaw pa natin makitang lalo pang nahihirapan ang ating mga manggagawang mandarayuhan sa pagtupad sa kanilang mga pangarap. Para sa mga kababayan nating naiipit sa kaguluhan, inaabuso at nanganganib ang buhay, ikinagagalak kong sa ilalim ng aking pamumuno ay ilulunsad natin ang One Repatriation Command Center o ORCC. Ilalaan natin ang isang social media platform ng Department of Migrant Workers at ang hotline upang matulungan agad at maligtas sila mula sa mas higit na kapahamakan. Noon, nangungutang pa ang isang ina ng bawat OFW upang sumakay ng barko para pumunta sa Maynila at mangatok sa iba't ibang ahensya para mapauwi ang anak na inaapi. Ngayon, kami na ang tatawag sa mga magulang ng OFW para sabihin sa kanila ang petsa kung kailan nila mayayakap at makakapiling ang kanilang mga anak. Sa kasalukuyan ay nakikipag-ugnayan tayo sa pamahalaan ng Saudi Arabia upang buksan muli ang deployment. Kaya natin at gagawin natin ang makipagnegosasyon na mabigyan ang ating mga kababayan doon ng tamang pasahod at mapangalagaan ang kanilang karapatan at kapakanan. Muli natin patitibayin ang respeto at pagkakaibigan ng ating dalawang bansa tulad ng namamagitan sa ating ama sa kanilang hari. Sa mga susunod na buwan ay magtutungo si Secretary Susan Ople sa Saudi Arabia upang tiyakin na may sapat na puwersang magsisiguro na mabubuksan muli ang empleo sa bansa at para maisulong ang ating kampanya laban sa human trafficking. Ngayon, para naman sa mga anak na naiwan sa Pilipinas, titiyakin ng Department of Migrant Workers sa pamamagitan ng OWA na sila ay maipapasok sa magagandang paaralan, magtuturo sa kanila ng financial literacy, mental wellness, sports, sining, kultura. Ito ay mangyayari sa pakikipagtulungan ng iba't ibang ahensya ng pamahalaan. Alagaan natin ang kabataang Pilipino sapagkat sila ang kinabukasan ng ating inang bayan. Sa ating mga kababayan na nasa ibang bansa, you deserve a home in government, not only for the money that you send home, but you are not cold tools of the economy. You deserve it for your sacrifices, for our country, and your perseverance and excellence in the global arena. You OFWs represent the fighting faith of the Filipinos as a nation and as a people. Let us transform your overseas journey into inspirational stories for all time. Thanks to you, our dear legislators, and of course to the man every OFW now refers to as their tatay, President Rodrigo Duterte. You passed the law that created this new home for our OFWs. On the area of foreign policy, I will not preside over any process that will abandon even 1 square inch of territory of the Republic of the Philippines to any foreign power. With respect to our place in the community of nations, the Philippines shall continue to be a friend to all, an enemy to none. The Philippines has always been open and welcoming to all our foreign friends and visitors. That is our worldview. That is our culture. But let me be clear. We are very jealous of all that is Filipino. We will be a good neighbor, always looking for ways to collaborate and cooperate with the end goal of mutually beneficial outcomes. If we agree, we will cooperate and we will work together. And if we differ, let us talk some more until we develop a consensus. After all, that is the Filipino way. But we will not waver. We will stand firm in our independent foreign policy with the national interest as our primordial guide. We commit to maintaining good relations with the rest of the world. As a matter of fact, it is my sincere belief that the need for strong bonds and collaboration among nations emerges in the direst of times, such as in a pandemic. The partnerships and alliances that we make with all will provide stability that all nations will need as we emerge into this new global economy. The Philippines will continue to promote stronger and multifaceted relationships with all our partners around the world. We are, in fact, grateful for the messages of support and offers of help that we have received from many of our friends in the international community. This has been communicated to us through the different envoys and ambassadors here in the Philippines. Such strong relationships can only be beneficial to all involved. As I am here today addressing the legislature, allow me now to propose legislation that we would like you to pass in support of these programs. 1. National Government Right-Sizing Program, a reform mechanism that seeks to enhance the government's institutional capacity to perform its mandate and to provide better services while ensuring optimal and efficient use of resources. Compared to previous government reorganization efforts, the NGRP will entail a comprehensive strategic review of the functions, operations, organization, system, and processes of the different agencies, and massive and transformational initiatives in agencies concerned, such as mergers, consolidations, splitting, transfer, and even the abolition of some offices. The right-sizing efforts will also involve the conduct of a comprehensive strategic review of functions, programs, and projects that will cut across various agencies. Number 2, a budget modernization bill. This seeks to institutionalize a cash-based budgeting system under Executive Order Number 91, Series 2019, to strengthen fiscal discipline in the allocation and use of budget resources by ensuring that every peso budgeted by the government would lead to the actual delivery of programs and projects. The full implementation of the CBS is timely and vital as the government executes response and recovery plans post-pandemic. Number 3, Tax Package 3 Valuation Reform Bill. This bill provides for the establishment of real property values and valuation standards across the country, and B, the development of real property information system that provides for the database of all real property transaction and declarations in the country. Number 4, Passive Income and Financial Intermediary Taxation Act. This seeks to reform the taxation of capital income and financial services by redesigning the financial sector taxation into simpler, fairer, more efficient, and a revenue-neutral tax system. It also represents to adopt a regionally competitive tax system. Number 5, E-Government Act, which provides for the establishment of the e-government master plan, which shall cover all e-government services and processes. Number 6, the Internet Transaction Act, or e-commerce law, which aims to establish an effective regulation of commercial activities through the Internet or electronic means to ensure that consumer rights and data privacy are protected, innovation is encouraged, fair advertising practices and competition are promoted. Online transactions are secured, intellectual property rights are protected, and product standards and safety are observed. Number 7, Government Financial Institutions Unified Initiatives to Distressed Enterprises for Economic Recovery. This seeks to provide financial assistance to distressed enterprises critical to economic recovery through programs and initiatives to be implemented by the Land Bank of the Philippines, the Development Bank of the Philippines, and the Philippine Guarantee Corporation for purposes of addressing liquidity or solvency problems of MSMEs and strategically important industries to encourage their continued operation and maintain employment. Number 8, the establishment of a Medical Reserve Corps. Establishes a Medical Reserve Corps under the Health and Emergency Management Bureau of the DOH. The MRC shall be composed of licensed physicians, medical students who have completed their 4 years of medical courses, graduates of medicine, registered nurses, licensed allied health professionals. Number 9, National Disease Prevention Management Authority. This bill seeks to create the Center for Disease Prevention and Control attached to the DOH. Number 10, the creation of the Virology Institute of the Philippines. This will create the Virology Science and Technology Institute of the Philippines as an attached agency of the DOST. All offices and units under the DOST with functions related to virology shall now be transferred to the Virology Institute of the Philippines. Number 11, the Department of Water Resources. This seeks to create the Department of Water Resources and adopts the integrated water resource management as the strategic framework for national water management, policy making, and planning. Number 12, unified system of separation, retirement, and pension. This grants a monthly disability pension in lieu of disability benefits provided under existing laws for military and uniformed personnel retired by reasons of disability. Number 13, the E-Governance Act. It promotes the use of internet, and other ICT to provide opportunities for citizens. Number 14, the National Land Use Act. This will provide for a rational and holistic management and development of our country's land and water resources, hold owners accountable for making these lands productive and sustainable, strengthen the LGU to manage ecological balance within its jurisdiction. It also provides for land use and physical planning framework as a mechanism in determining policies and principles to implement this legislative measure. Number 15, the National Defense Act. This seeks to amend the antiquated National Defense Act of 1935 to provide for a change in the military structure of the armed forces of the Philippines that is more responsive to current and future non-conventional security threats to the country's territorial integrity and national sovereignty. Number 16, Mandatory Reserve Officers Training Corps and National Service Training Program. This seeks to reinstitute the ROTC program as a mandatory component of senior high school programs, grades 11 and 12, in all public and private tertiary level educational institutions. The aim is to motivate, train, organize, and mobilize students for national defense preparedness, including disaster preparedness and capacity building for risk-related situations. Number 17, enactment of an enabling law for the natural gas industry. This seeks to foster the development of the midstream natural gas industry in a bid to strengthen Philippine energy security by diversifying the country's primary sources of energy and promoting the role of natural gas as a complementary fuel to variable renewable energy. Number 18, amendments to the Electric Power Industry Reform Act, or EPIRA. This aims to improve the implementation of the law's provisions and enhance its effectiveness to address the high cost of electricity, alleged market collusion, and insufficient power supply. The bill seeks to restructure the Energy Regulation Commission to foster accountability and improve the Commission's government system that would ensure consumer protection and in enhancing competitive operation of the electricity market. Number 19, amendments to the Build, Operate, Transfer law. This seeks to improve the implementation of the public-private partnership program and to be able to direct the desired outputs and outcomes in line with the strategic development targets of the country. Specifically, the amendments seek to, 1, address the ambiguities in the existing law, 2, address the bottlenecks and challenges affecting the implementation of the PPP program, and 3, foster a more competitive and enabling environment for PPPs. To my fellow Filipinos, ang aking mga minamahal na kababayan, Batid ko na hindi madali ang ating pinagdaraanan sa nakaraang higit na 2 taon. Alam ko rin na ang bawat isa sa inyo ay ginagawa ang lahat ng inyong makakaya upang patuloy na harapin ang lahat na pagsubok sa kasalukuyan. I do not intend to diminish the risks and the challenges that we face in this turbulent time in global history. And yet, I see sunlight filtering through these dark clouds. We have assembled the best Filipino minds to help navigate us to this global crisis that we are now facing. We will endure. Let our Filipino spirit ever remain undimmed. I know this in my mind. I know it in my heart. I know it in my very soul. The state of the nation is sound. Thank you and good afternoon. Marami pong salamat sa inyong lahat.
Everything you touched the
Yeah, I couldn't leave anything out.
Ladies and gentlemen, on the part of the Senate, the joint session is adjourned.
On the part of the House of Representatives, the joint session is adjourned.
Stand by, guys. So we just heard the first State of the Nation address of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., which lasted around 1 hour and 14 minutes. We have now with us in the Rappler studio, Rappler Editor-at-Large Marites Vitog and Rappler CEO Maria Ressa. Still with me, of course, are Rappler reporters Pia Renada, Lian Buwan, and Rambo Talabong. Of course, also JC Purongbayan is still with us, and historian Naloy Claudio.
Hi.
JC, let's start with you. The president talked about the economy. You wanted to hear about the economy. I saw you nodding a lot during the speech. What did you think?
Yes, well, kung gaano ka konti yung numbers na narinig natin from him in the inauguration and in past press briefings, bumawi naman, Sofia, dito sa SONA. Ang dami nating numbers na narinig. Pero if you look at them, actually, these are really just the targets of the Development Budget Coordination Committee. This committee is formed by the NEDA chief, the DBM chief, and in fact, they have already laid down these numbers many weeks ago. So the president is merely just reiterating these targets. But we would have wanted to hear more of how he actually plans to achieve these goals and targets. And although he did mention a legislative agenda in the end, we wanted to hear more, for example, about his fiscal consolidation plan. He just mentioned that there will be one, but it's actually still light on details. We don't know exactly how that will happen. For example, will there be new taxes? What savings will the government generate from right sizing, for example, and other cost-cutting measures? So we wanted to hear more about that. And as well, many of the policies that he mentioned and programs are actually just carryovers from the Duterte administration. For example, yung mga build projects, which he emphasized will still play a key role in growth. These are just projects that have been carried over from the past administrations. Pero it's also interesting to note that many of the policies that President Duterte favored in the past 6 years were not mentioned. For example, drugs, criminality. So there is a change in tone from the previous president.
You did mention some of the policies that he wanted, some of the measures that he wanted Congress to pass. Which one of these are feasible considering the environment we have right now, of course, with like high inflation and everything?
Yes, well, I think he's on the money when it comes to agriculture. I think many things need to be cleaned up in agriculture. And he has a special position right now as the interim agriculture secretary. But I think we need to hear more details about, for example, the fiscal consolidation plan as mentioned. For example, when you just look at the indicators, for example, rising debt ratios, and then you have inflation on this side as well. These are key problems, but I think, again, we need to hear more about how they will reach those targets rather than just hear the forecast, for example, or projection.
I think, JC, because the assumption is that these are transitory things, right? So you look at the way he's talking about the peso, for example, he's assuming that there won't be big interest rate hikes on the part of the Fed. So hindi kailangan sumunod ng BSP. So medyo tataas na yung piso by next year. And, it's kind of, I think, reasonable to make those assumptions now. But what if things change, right? You never know how aggressive the Fed can get because we're entering completely new territory, at least both in the Philippines and in the United States, with respect to how quickly interest rates can rise, di ba? Because low inflation for around 10 years. Tapos ngayon, aggressive interest rate hike period. This is like unpredictable territory, and it's very mahirap mag-make ng forecast about where the peso will be, where inflation will be, given this like strange new world we have, I think.
Exactly, and the president actually admitted at the beginning that there are important global factors behind key trends such as inflation. So there's a lot of uncertainty right now. We have to look out for what will happen in the global stage. For example, the Russia-Ukraine war and other things. So that will definitely have an impact on whether or not the Marcos Jr. administration will be able to achieve their goals.
Of course, we'll get back to you on that. But of course, I want to ask Pia, another big issue that he talked about, of course, was agriculture. He is the agriculture secretary. What did you make of his proposal so far?
So nothing new about his emphasis on increasing production. So he's been repeating that. He's been saying that in past meetings and press conferences. Everything naman that he mentioned in terms of increasing production is something that all administrations have tried to do. So, but I appreciated the categorical statement on pursuing a policy of fuel subsidies, which is something that a lot of, in fact, progressive groups want to hear, right? Also, more financial aid for farmers and fishermen. He said categorically that they will pursue government purchase of feeds, fertilizer, pesticides. So that's interesting. But siguro the biggest, I would say, that yung pinakabago na sinabi niya on agriculture was that EO on imposing a 1-year moratorium on the loan payments, the interest payments of agrarian reform beneficiaries, which has been done by the Duterte administration. 2020 pa lang may moratorium na sila because of the pandemic. So in effect, parang Marcos is just copying that, but with the problem in mind of the rising production input, cost of production, and the ongoing pandemic. Then he also mentioned a law that he wants Congress to pass that would condone the debts of these agrarian reform beneficiaries. So that's something, in fact, that economists have recommended before. Duterte time pan, this is another stimulus package in a way because we're giving more income to more money to spend for these agrarian reform beneficiaries and using that to develop their land, diba? Since wala silang babayaran, they could use that money to develop their farmlands even more. So that's also actually a law that his sister is supporting. She's authoring. Si Senator Amy Marcos is behind efforts to have that law passed in the Senate. So that's interesting for me.
Right. We'll touch a little bit more on that later, but I want to go to Marites, who is with us virtually. Marites, what are your thoughts on President Marcos's first SONA? What stood out to you?
Yeah, let me just... Okay, can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay, let me just share a few points now. So this is how Bongbong campaigned in poetry. We just heard the word unity and some big phrases, and now this is how he's going to lead in prose, but his prose is technical language. I was taken aback a bit when he really gave us, the lowdown on the economy. He said there are factors not of which are beyond our control and some of our own making. So anyway, JC already has talked about that. So my take is that he gave a lot of things, which some are new, some are not, like 19 proposed bills. Among the past leaders, if I remember President Ramos, he would only give really top priority bills. So these were passed through Congress, but these were just like 5, but very important priority bills. So he gave, parang walang headlines, parang they're all there. He just gave them away for the Congress to act on. Number 2, I'm a bit conflicted when he said right sizing. I get his message, but right sizing, but there will be new offices that will be created, new departments, new agencies. So how will he balance that? How will Congress balance that? And number 3, dun sa health sector, which is really very important, syempre hindi niya binanggit na very low ang ating vaccination rates boosters, but he said that it will be ramped up, there will be a new round, so that's worth looking forward to. But also he did not mention the nursing crisis. We have a shortage of nurses in the Philippines, and that's a very real problem. So siguro parang what JC said, some kulang din sa details, but maybe because this is a SONA, he wanted to paint a broad picture. And the other point I wanted to make is that he stressed the importance of science-based research, science-based for agriculture, etc. But we don't have a science secretary yet. We have an acting science, DOST secretary. Number 2, health, wala pa rin tayong health secretary. So, maganda naman na nalatag niya itong mga priorities, pero dapat meron ng somebody who will hit the ground running. I think it's different when you're just an acting or an officer in charge. I don't think you have that full powers. I don't know, there must be some reservations if you're just an OIC. So I think the last point I'll make is that, of course, there's no mention on human rights and transparency. Maybe that's not his priority. Anyway, Lian can talk about that. He did mention about access to information and keeping our freedoms in terms of access to information, reporting, and respect for human rights alive. And I think JC also mentioned this, but I just wanted to, because I've been following the railways projects, and I don't know if there will be private companies that will invest, that will join up with the government, because these are like the Mindanao Railway. It's huge. The viability has been questioned. That's why China has not also approved the loans, and also for the PNR South and the other railway, the Subic Clark. So, these are all aspirations. These are all dream projects, but we'll see where the money will come from. And maybe my last point lang is that there's an irony here, improving the tax system, make it simple. But there's this big question of our president not having paid his the estate taxes of his family as well, which is amounting to billions of pesos. So that's all for now, and I'll join you back later.
Right, thank you, Marites. Maria, we want to hear your thoughts. Were you satisfied with the speech? What stood out to you?
So I love hearing what JC and Marites had said. So first of all, it was a good speech, especially after 6 years of a State of the Nation address that could ramble, right? This one is, it gave concrete plans. We do have 19 legislative, he set goals. What's missing? How? That's the first one. And then I think, while there was great content, and the second point is that he did bring up things that weren't really prioritized before. The third is because it was so thorough in many ways, what he omitted becomes even more crucial. It was interesting to see climate change finally. It's such an existential moment for climate, and as early as 2013, the Philippines is the third most disaster-prone country globally. Here, he mentions it front and center. Technology, finally, not just for government, but also as an ability to help jumpstart. This is one of the things that we tried to do with Rappler, to help government jumpstart, right? To bring development up a level. He set direction by laying out his direction, even by avoiding conflict. So it was very interesting during the focus on education and face-to-face classes, how he sidestepped his vice president, because Vice President Sara Duterte talked about face-to-face classes and not requiring vaccinations or boosters, right? But President Marcos really laid out that he will ask the Department of Health to make sure that students are safe, that they will increase boosters. As Marites said, though, he didn't say how much lower we didn't have. Okay, so now let's go to what did he omit? Justice, rule of law, human rights, press freedom, anti-corruption measures. And then I think the last thing I'll say is just in terms of expectations globally. This will stem, hopefully, JC, you can respond, you'll know this better, but our peso has decreased, is at 56, 57, and hopefully these measures, while not enough with the House, it's clear direction. After all, where the government goes, we all go. Last thing I'll say is the MSMEs, that one of the 19 legislative agenda he laid out. Again, like Marita said, though, it's far better to focus on 3, get it in, rather than 19 and disperse your political power. But in this case, what was interesting is the MSMEs, medium MSMEs have been left out of many instances. In this one, more than 99% of the economy is powered by MSMEs. It's time. So overall, it's a good start.
Mm-hmm. JC, I want to talk to you a little bit about what Maria mentioned. Of course, as Maria said, the world is also listening into Marcos's first speech. They might be happy to hear things about economic liberalization and several tax reform measures. Talk to us more about that. Do you think that this will bring in the investments that are needed, satisfy what all the concerns that that international officials have had with doing business in the Philippines?
Yeah, I think we need to talk about one of the legacies of the Duterte administration is that foreign direct investments have really plummeted since the time of President Benigno Aquino III, and for various reasons. And I think in order to accelerate growth in the Philippines, we really need to focus on attracting more foreign direct investments, as has been mentioned. But I think there's a lot of factors. When you want to attract investors, first of all, you need to ramp up investments in energy, and yet we have an impending crisis with the depletion of Malampaya reserves by as early as 2025. Wow. President Marcos mentioned Malampaya and the need to beef up energy investments, but we need to hear more about that. Leloy actually mentioned earlier that many of the policies that he mentioned, for example, the National Land Use Act, the tax reform packages, are actually the brainchild of former NEDA chief Carl Chua. And of course, between himself and the former Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez III, these are important reform measures. Some might say a tad too neoliberal. But it's interesting to note that Marcos Jr. has adopted many of these very specific measures, and I think that attests to, the reputation or the legacy of the economic managers of President Duterte. Maybe Leloy wants to.
Di ba kanina we weren't sure about whether or not he would be a continuity president in terms of the economy, but it's very clear, simula pa lang sinabi niya, he mentioned CREATE Bill, a law, he mentioned Public Services Act, and then he said he would effectively complete the tax package. Kasi tatlo yung tax package bills, if I'm not mistaken. Una yung TRAIN, pangalawa yung CREATE, tapos itong pangatlo, on property valuation. So it's essentially completing the Duterte economic reform legacy. Of course, some people disagree with that reform legacy, but definitely he's placed himself squarely within that legacy.
Before we continue talking about the economy, which really made up a large chunk of this speech, Lian, I want to ask you what your thoughts were. Again, this was the first major policy speech, no? But then he left many things out, essentially, like what Maria said, justice, human rights. Anything that stood out to you?
Yeah,
Is that what stood out to you?
It stood out to me that there was, again, no mention of human rights, and actually, probably he created another concern for the human rights sector, which is, highlighting that he wants a mandatory ROTC, which for the progressive groups would be alarming since it would be a continuation of a militaristic policy, and the history between progressive groups and the military. I was also, it also stood out to me his foreign policy pronouncement that he said we will not yield an inch of our territory, but he also said that we will be a friend to all and an enemy to none. So that signals a better relationship with the international community, but it completely leaves out the human rights aspect of it. Like, would he rejoin the Philippines to the ICC? Would he cooperate with the International Criminal Court? The investigation of the crimes against humanity allegedly in the Duterte government is ongoing. Another thing that stood out for me was the cleaning of the four-piece list, because it also raised alarm among the human rights sector how Secretary Erwin Tulfo would do that, because they're scared that it would lead to a Tokhang style policy of hunting down those who are not supposed to be on the beneficiary list of the 4P. And I was also it also stood out to me that he dedicated a huge chunk to OFWs. He gave a shout out to President Rodrigo Duterte. If you notice, he gave a heart-tugging statement about how Filipinos should have a home in the government, and he spoke in Filipino too. Kinausap niya ng direkta yung mga OFWs who turned up for him big time in the elections. And I don't want to leave out the history that the number of OFWs increased radically during the time of his father nung nagkaroon ng labor export policy. He did not mention whether he would have the same labor export policy again, but he did mention that in the campaign, pero meron lang backtracking na naganap ng konti. So in that whole segment on OFW, it was heavy on response. So magkakaroon ng one repatriation center. Yun nga, yung heart-tugging statement niya na kapag merong in trouble na OFW na minamaltrato sa ibang bansa, yung nanay hindi na kailangang tumawag para tanungin or umiyak kung kailan mapapauwi yung anak nila. Yung gobyerno na ang tatawag at sasabihin ng petsa ng pagpapauwi. That is a very specific promise. And I'm guessing the entire OFW segment of society is really counting on that. So merong talagang emotional appeal to the OFWs. But again, I don't want to leave out the history that nagkaroon ng maraming OFW during the time of his father. Sophia?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Then, of course, we know that the OFW community overwhelmingly supported Marcos. So that's something that would be important for them to hear, that there are these policies to care for them when they're abroad and their families when they're here at home. Interestingly enough, speaking to the experts as well, they mentioned that it would be good to have, as part of the DMW, going home policy to make sure that these OFWs also have a pathway to go back home. But just jump a little bit to something that Lian mentioned, of course, was when he's talking about foreign policy, no mention of whether or not he would join the ICC. Rambo covered the war on drugs under President Rodrigo Duterte's administration. Rambo, what can you say about this? Did it surprise you that he didn't mention this at all?
Well, actually, Sophia, consistent siya sa kampanya na hindi naman talaga niya voluntarily nilalabas ito. Pero kasi, public safety is something that Filipinos are concerned about. Pero sa SONA ni President Marcos, wala nang isang pagbanggit dito sa state of our streets. criminality. Kay Duterte, taon-taon niya sinasabi na mas magiging intense ang war on drugs. Palagi siya nagsisingit, ina-address ang mga tao na sinasabi niya ang nagko-commit ng crimes na matakot kayo, ang pulis ay naandyan pa rin. Pero dito kay Marcos, wala nang isang pagbanggit sa gera kontra droga at saka sa pulisya. Actually, yung public safety talaga, yung kriminalidad. At alam natin na hindi masyadong nakapag-aresto ang Duterte administration ng mga big-time drug lords. Pero si President Marcos, pwede sana niyang talunan yun na ito ang aking bagong polisiya dito sa war on drugs. Pero hindi. Nakita nga natin na karamihan ng kanyang SONA ay talagang economic policies, social welfare issues. Tapos, dealing with the left, wala siyang binanggit tungkol doon. Peace talks, nothing on that. Especially police reform. Yung corruption sa police, ito rin yung isang theme na nawawala, corruption. At this point, marami na sana tayo na pag-usapan kung si Duterte na kung sino-sino ang kanya mga tinreten dito sa department na to, sinong corrupt. Pero akong ultimatum sa inyo, si Marcos walang ganon, wala siyang pagbanggit na kahit ano. Dun sa DILG, talaga nag-focus siya sa local government, so maraming decentralization, yung nabanggit nga niya hospitals in different parts of the country, healthcare centers, care for the women and children, very local government, wala masyado on the interior part of it. Housing, wala rin siyang binanggit doon. In general talaga dito sa SONA ni Marcos, walang threatening at saka pagbanggit dito sa usual weapons na ginagamit ni Duterte sa kanyang SONA, panakot. Si Marcos wala pagbanggit ni isa at nakakapanibago, pero kailangan din natin abangan kung ano ba talaga ang state of our public safety, kasi ito'y talagang bagay na talaga ang mga Pilipino ay may pakialaman. Ito ang dahilan kung bakit na-elect si President Duterte. So it has yet to be seen kung hahanapin ba ng mga Pilipino kung ano ang plano ni President Marcos para dito. Sophia?
Also considering, of course, yung shooting incident kahapon. Of course, that's something that we can't forget about, no?
Yeah.
Before we jump to Krista, Lian mentioned, of course, again, under foreign policy, we will not yield an inch of our territory. Interestingly enough, you also mentioned Malampaya, which, of course, you mentioned, JC, is expected to run out as early as 2025. Marites, you wanted to talk a little bit something about service contracts. He said it needed a review. Although, I don't know what he meant by that, because the service contract system is pretty clear already that Philippine laws have to be followed. So, what review do you think he's alluding to here?
Yes, that's why I was intrigued when he said we should review the service contracts, because I think the controversial service contract, the proposed service contract with China, with the China Oil and Gas China Offshore Oil Corporation. So I think yun ang magiging test nung sinasabi niyang we will not give up an inch of our territory. Sana he put also maritime territory. Doon ang magiging test. So it's actually a good barometer. Tingnan natin when there will be serious negotiations between COOC and the Philippines again, or can we now negotiate with other countries, US, Germany, Europe? Yun lang, I just wanted, it's going to be a test nga of the rhetoric of President Marcos.
Yeah, agree. Also because at the end of the day, the oil and gas talks broke down essentially because of the service contract system where you have to recognize Philippine laws. And I also cover that. So I just want to point out that it's also interesting that President Marcos mentioned in the same chunk that, if we're talking to people, as long as it's mutually beneficial to the both of us, then we'll do it. But if we find challenges, then we'll talk some more. So it's interesting to see how that review will play out. I agree with Marites that it will definitely be a test of his style of his independent foreign policy. But also on that note, let's talk to Krista, who is who's with us in social media. She's our digital communications specialist. While we hear all the thoughts about the SONA and the technical aspects that have been mentioned, what are the conversations online? How are people reacting to this, both supporters and people who are critical of the president? All right. Okay, we'll get back to Krista. She's just going to fix her audio.
Hello?
Okay, there you go. We're back with you. Okay, we can hear you. Go ahead, Krista.
Hello. So, now that we mentioned na yung mga technical aspects ng SONA, many people were commenting how it was too technical, boring to listen to, na hindi nila masyadong naiintindihan yung mga sinasabi, na it's ironic na it's supposed to be the State of the Nation address, but it's not easily understood by majority of the people in the nation. Tapos, so medyo during the start of the speech, medyo bumaba yung interest online on SONA. Yung mga trends sa Twitter, they were mostly dominated by topics that were not related to SONA. So, meron ding mga right before SONA, people were talking about, may SONA pala, I'd rather do this thing or this other thing rather than watching President Marcos deliver his address. So, nung ano din naman, na-observe din ng mga tao na right after he discussed the economy, nung nag-discuss siya about agriculture, they noticed the shift from using technical English language to common Filipino language. So people noted how people noted that this shows a class divide that is Marcos. Sorry. If Marcos is talking to economic managers, to businessmen, is going to use technical English, pero when it comes to agriculture naman, talking to farmers, is going to use Tagalog. So, ayun. So, other than that, people also, yung na-bring up ni Maria kanina na Marcos indeed laid out his priorities for his administration, but there was lacking action plans. That was also what people mentioned in social media posts. Hinahanap nila kung ano yung talagang action plans ni Marcos to deliver his priorities.
Right. So, I mean, interesting enough, it was a very technical speech, no? So, might have been hard for some people to connect to all the numbers and figures that were being thrown around. But Rambo, can you talk to us about, well, now the speech is done. So, what's the story from Marcos supporters? How are they framing this? What's their narrative?
You know, Sophia, ito yung binabanggit ng maraming tao sa Twitter at siguro sa ibang mga chatbox na nakikita ko na ano ba yan, yung speech ni President Marcos, hindi ko maintindihan. Pero kasi hindi rin yung malaking problema kay President Marcos. Kasi meron siyang army of vloggers who can regurgitate everything that he is saying and pwedeng ilabas kung ano talaga yung positive lang na pwedeng ilabas dyan. Pwede nilang isa-isahin yan araw-araw itong pag-uusapan nila economic policy on one day. The next day, pwedeng pag-usapan yung kasunod economic policy, pwedeng kasunod OFWs. Kasi at the heart of it, yung SONA naman talaga ni President Marcos, it's still targeting to his base, yung mga OFWs at saka yung mga social welfare projects niya, yung mga hospitals at saka ayuda, wala namang makaka-contest dyan. Kahit na English yan ngayon, dahil pwede itong i-process dito sa factory of content creators ni Marcos, napakadaling mai-process yan on the ground to the people who might have tuned out now, pero for the next few days, for the next few weeks, marami pa rin manunood dyan, yung mga magpa-process ng information kay Marcos. Tapos itong banda na sinasabi na hindi maintindihan si Marcos, actually, when it comes to the Marcos narrative, kahit na hindi maintindihan si President Marcos sa kanyang pag-i-English, meron ding paghirit ng mga Marcos supporters na, yan si President Marcos, hindi ko maintindihan, para ko siyang professor sa economics na hindi ko maintindihan. So it also plays up to his image kasi kahit nagpa-practice, sinasabi ng mga tao na praktisado siya, he can only move with the script. For many Marcos supporters, that's actually pretty pleasant kasi kahit na ganun yung kanyang delivery, dahil hindi maintindihan ng mga tao, meron pa rin narrative na pwedeng isuksok si Marcos para lang paulit-ulitin na napakagaling talaga ni Marcos as a president. Bahagi talaga yun ng branding niya. Tapos, it's also good to note na yung kay Marcos as yung branding din niya as a president who understands 21st century problems. Sophia, so nandyan yung climate change at saka social media. Ina-expect din natin dito sa paglabas ng SONA at with the good direction, marami na nga rin nagsasabi magandang direction ni Paul Soriano, tama ba? Na itong kanyang SONA, most likely, maraming lalabas dyan ng vlogs. And kahit sa mismong channel ni Marcos, makikita natin yan, ang kanyang experience sa kanyang SONA. Behind the scenes, lalabas yan. So this SONA is also part of a grander narrative at magagamit din to at magagamit ng kanyang base na maaaring nasa echo chamber na kung nakikita natin sa echo chamber ng isang banda, binabati ko si Marcos, hindi maintindihan. Sa ibang echo chamber, ang galing ni President Marcos at merong mga taong magpapaliwanag para sa mga bagay na hindi naiintindihan. Sofia?
Tama. So, while highly technical, might have been hard to stand, positive pa rin yung takeaway na prepared and everything. JC, go ahead.
Actually, there's no reason for Marcos Jr. not to be able to explain economics in Filipino. Parang, kasi parang many people notice na parang nung agri issues na, biglang na Filipino. Pero actually, you can trim down yung numbers and actually give an honest assessment of what's really happening. Pero in the end, what he said is that the state of the nation is sound. Pero based on the first part, at least, of his SONA, parang it's more of what we wish the state of the nation will be in a couple of years from now. Parang yun ang dating na parang it's very light actually when you just look between the lines. Parang it's really quite light on the details. Parang many people might be impressed by the numbers, pero it's actually quite light on how you will be able to achieve those numbers.
Yeah, interesting point you mentioned. Na parang President Marcos ended by saying the state of the nation is sound, but then, of course, many challenges, many problems mentioned throughout the entire speech. No? And there are also a lot of contradictions or seeming ironies, like Marites mentioned. The fact that for example, I want to review K-12, but I also want students to be competitive. Let's bring in Bons Magsambol to talk about exactly that, the education policies of President Marcos, he's on the line with us right now. Bons, what did you make of the statements he made about face-to-face classes, about K-12?
Yan. So, Sofia, maraming nasabi si President Marcos about his policies for the education sector. Actually, interesting dito yung pag-reiterate niya ng pagbabalik sa face-to-face classes. It can be recalled just last week na somehow parang kinontradict niya yung policy order ni Vice President and Education Secretary Sara Duterte. Kasi dun sa order ni Vice President Sara Duterte, sinabi niya na mandatory lahat. So ibig sabihin kahit sa anong area, even in overcrowded classrooms here in Metro Manila, magbabalik tayo sa face-to-face classes. Pero last week yung order na sinabi niya, in very specific areas, hindi pwede daw magkaroon ng blended learning. And tingnan natin on how this policy will pan out in the next few weeks. And then of course, interesting din yung sinabi niya about the rollout of booster shots. So i-strengthen yung implementation nito. Sinabi din ni Officer in Charge Health, sa DOH Officer in Charge, Maria Rosario Vergeren last week na under her leadership, is-strengthen niya talaga yung vaccination program. Dito nabanggit din ng pahapyaw yung lack of classrooms, pero hindi pa rin tayo nakakita kung hindi niya nabanggit kung ilang classrooms yung kailangang i-build ng gobyerno para magkaroon tayo ng sapat na classrooms. Kasi even before the pandemic, class of 70 to 80, packed yun sa isang classroom. Pero sa new normal, sinasabi ng mga experts na kailangan 20 students lang yung kailangan sa isang classrooms. And ito, interesting din na na-bring up niya yung about sa mga learning modules. It can be recalled na si Vice President Leni Robredo, naging biktima siya dito sa learning modules kasi she was put in a bad light sa isang learning module for senior high school program. So tingnan natin kung paano niya to i-address. At the same time, of course, sinabi niya na magkakaroon ng careful review ng K-12 program. So interesting din ito dahil of course yung media and information literacy, ito din yung sinasabi ng mga teachers na nakausap natin na dapat magkaroon ng media and information literacy as early as grade 1. Kasi yung mga grade 1, yung age na yun, nag-online class na sila. Pero yung media and information literacy, subject lang siya ng grade 11 students. So, tingnan natin kasi merong mga studies have shown na the Marcos family and of course, the Duterte are benefiting from this information online.
Interesting din that President Marcos mentioned, there was a line he was saying, we need to invest in our students. I'm not talking about history what's being taught. I'm talking about materials that are necessary for effective teaching in this day and age. And he talked about connectivity to the internet. But at the same time, we also know that there are I mean, the landscape of the internet there's good and bad in it, no?
To say the least. Though.
Yeah. Bon. So, what did you make of that? Kasi there's also, I mean, he talked a lot about needing to connect students to the internet. What might this look like under DepEd? Kasi, I mean, even during the distance learning, hirap na hirap yung mga teachers and students just to be able to do this.
Actually, very promising yung mga education policies na sinabi niya na kailangan bigyan ng internet connectivity lahat ng students dito sa bansa. Pero of course, they have to address first yung mga basic. So, paano natin bibigyan ng internet connectivity yung mga lugar na wala, for example, na kuryente? So, di ba, we have to address that. And very little, of course, yung mga details pa na nasabi niya. So, interesting kung paano mag-i-implement tong mga ganitong policy. And of course, binanggit niya din yung preparation and training of teachers for the shift to the new normal in learning. Alam natin na parang itong mga teachers din talaga yung nahirapan dito sa digital shift kasi hindi sila equipped kung ano talaga yung kailangan nila. Of course, most of them nga hindi pa masyadong marunong kung paano gumawa ng basic na PowerPoint presentation. So what more pa kaya navigating the internet?
Thank you, Bonds, for that. We'll get back to you in a bit. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the measures that President Marcos was talking about in his speech. No? Again, he mentioned 19 priority measures that he wanted passed. Anything that stood out to you there? Was anything especially positive or negative for you in this?
Sophia, for me, 19, that's a lot. In fact, he was caught on a hot mic saying to, I think, Martin Romualdez or Senate President Zubiri, I couldn't exclude anything. So he just wanted to cram in everything there. But I think he may have excluded some things that are important also, because I know economy is top of mind, but there's also social legislation that needs to happen.
Noticeably absent.
I was very critical of candidate Marcos when he was running, but I really like the fact that he seemed very progressive on many social issues. Like, he was open to gay unions, he was open to divorce, he was open to abortion for rape and incest. And I was hoping that he would mention some of those socially progressive bits of legislation that he seemed partial to during the campaign.
Pia?
For me, the National Land Use Act, no? Kasi in every SONA Duterte gave, he also mentioned passage of the NLUA as one of his priorities, but it never happened. And this is also basically 20 years nang nakabinbin ito sa Kongreso. And it's just going to be interesting to see if Marcos Jr. can actually pull off something that his predecessors have not been able to do. And we know that a lot of the opposition to this act has actually come from the Senate, particularly from Senator Cynthia Villar. So, diba, how will he manage that relationship? What will his political capital bring to this battle? Because people really have pointed out the need for this law, especially with climate change, the need for better urban planning with our cities being so, diba, parang even this is actually also a food security issue, because we need to make sure we have enough land to ensure we have crops for food security. So it really all ties into that. But other things I found interesting were things like the water resource management law, which people now were saying that we need better system of taking care of our water, like rationalizing and making sure we harness this resource properly in the age of global warming, climate change. Also, on the health side, yung creating a CDC and the Virology Institute of the Philippines, which Duterte also wanted to put up in his time, but of course, through his support behind, but wala nang time to pass these measures. So, will Marcos Jr. actually get these going in his time? Dun naman sa mandatory ROTC, this is obviously something that came from the Vice President, right? Like, parang it was really her pet advocacy, which I think he felt he needed to mention, just because she's such a powerful figure on his cabinet.
Right. Before I go to you, JC, I just want to thank Marites, Maria, and Krista for joining us today in our discussion. Of course, we'll hear more of your thoughts in the coming days as well. JC, go ahead.
Yes, well, I was interested about yung proposal when it comes to cash-based budgeting, and that's actually an advocacy of Secretary Jokno during his time as Budget and Management Secretary. But we have to remember, and I'm echoing one of the tweets of my friends, budget expert Zai Susara, that we have to remember that the cash-based budgeting proposal was effectively scrapped by the previous Congress, and it actually went nowhere. there was a huge demand for the old system, the obligation-based budgeting, and we have to see how well the new Congress will be receptive to this new call for cash-based budgeting. I also was interested in the proposal for assistance to corporations from government financial institutions. You will remember the guide bill that was proposed early on in the pandemic. That was a proposal to help out many corporations that were in financial distress. But right now, as mentioned by the President himself, the economy has actually grown quite rapidly. In the first quarter, for example, more than 8%. And then they are they are forecasting higher growth figures in the future. So I'm not sure how well this sits with the current situation because we're not anymore in a recession. And many corporations don't need aid that much compared to early on in the pandemic. So I'm just interested as well that, again, this goes back to the point that many of these proposals are carryovers from the Duterte administration, but times have changed since then somehow, and these policies need to adapt as well.
Lian, what about you?
Yeah, I just wanted to relay or communicate the reaction so far of the progressive groups reacting to the promise to condone debt for the CARP grantees. From the Kilosang Magbubukid ng Pilipinas, from its chairperson emeritus, Duterte's former Agrarian Reform Secretary, they're saying that yung condoning debt for the CARP grantees has long been overdue. It's welcome, but they are hoping that finally it can be implemented this time around. Even yung moratorium on amortization, they're saying that this is also overdue. So they're welcoming the announcement, but they're hoping that finally sana this time matupad na. What the KMP is saying is that yung pangako daw ni President Marcos to regarding dito sa CARP is covers only the government-owned lands. They are asking paano naman yung mga lupain na ang pagmamay-ari ng mga private corporation like the haciendas. So sinasabi nila na they would have wanted to hear more about land acquisition para magkaroon ng mas marami pang mga lupa na ipapamahagi under CARP. I've also talked to Attorney Jobert Pahilga of Centra. He's a veteran lawyer for peasants and farm. Sabi niya na first and foremost, kailangan ng Marcos administration to do a proper inventory of how many kung ilan na yung lupa na actually na-award na under CARP pero hindi pa ma-turn over sa mga farmer, because this is precisely what happened in Concepcion Tarlac sa Hacienda Tinang. The farmers, the beneficiaries were claiming or asserting their ownership to a land that has long been transferred to them by the Department of Agrarian Reform. Pero hindi nila makuha because of the laborious system, the mechanism that it allowed the private owners to file for an appeal. So yun ang sinasabi ni Attorney Pahilga na siguro first and foremost, i-make sure ng gobyerno na lahat na ng bigyan ng lupain under CARP would be able to actually get their land or take ownership of the land.
Duterte mentioned the Hague ruling.
Thank you, Lian. Pia, you and I were just chatting a little bit right now. Also interesting, of course, that President Marcos he mentioned no more lockdowns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting promise kasi parang, I think coming from a president who has inherited the pandemic problem, right? People want to hear how his pandemic policy will be different from Duterte's. And I think some people would, especially businesses, would welcome, right, the announcement na no more lockdowns. But at the same time, I think it's also a very risky promise because, diba, you might eat your words if you find like a really virulent variety of the virus coming into our shores, and diba, if mapipilitan ka mo lockdown, and then people will rewind to the SONA and say, "Oy, but you said no more lockdown." So how do you navigate that situation, putting that ultimatum so early on when really we don't really know what will happen in the pandemic? There's so many uncertainties with this pandemic, even with monkeypox being a global health emergency. So it will be really interesting. Because in a way, he's putting pressure on the DOH secretary and his future task force or whatever entity will handle pandemic response. Na, basta no lockdowns kasi sinabi na niyan sa SONA. So medyo limited na yung space that they will operate on if lockdowns will no longer be an option that they can use to handle the pandemic. Kasi lockdown, very general term yan eh. Are you saying no more granular lockdowns? Like you won't lock down streets na may mga different
COVID
kind of
cases
na mas virulent. So I don't know, it'd just be interesting that he made such a categorical statement without like a health secretary na aside from an OIC, without like an entity, a task force that's behind him already named, diba? So limiting, diba, what yung mga galawan nila.
Speaking of COVID, and I don't know if it's because I've been living in the United States for 2 years, but it seems to be absent in our conversations about yung COVID, yung therapeutics. Because he mentions vaccines, and we mention vaccines all the time, but where's the money for therapeutics? Because these are life-saving, yung Paxlovid and Molnupiravir. That's also one step we can take to make sure that when students go to school at umuwi sila, mahawa nila yung lolo or lola nila, pwede uminom ng Molnupiravir. Because the thing with this pandemic is that it's dangerous, but we not only have medicine to prevent contracting the disease, we have medicine to treat the disease, and I think that should be foregrounded in these conversations as well.
Siguro just to go back to PS observation about the no lockdown promise. There are many promises in this SONA, from the economy to health. But I'm not even sure. I mean, we can of course debate whether, how credible these promises are, but I'm not really sure how relevant it is for many Filipinos. For example, if the Marcos administration fails to achieve many of these targets or promises, will people even mind given the quality of discourse? I mean, the propagandists, the bloggers can always sweep these things under the rug if things don't go their way. So I mean, it's maybe I'm just cynical, but but yeah.
One promise that I think it will be hard to like change the narrative on is food prices. Kasi even now when I talk to average Filipinos who supported Marcos, they're already saying sana matupad niya kasi they feel it, gut issue talaga siya. Hindi mo pwede ma-changing narrative sa tumataas sa presyo ng bigas or oil. I mean, you can't disinformationize that. I mean, it's something people feel every day.
Tsaka mas mahirap to back down from this as compared to yung I will end criminality in 3 to 6 months. Kasi yung ending criminality in 3 to 6 months, kaya mo pang justify, pwede mo sabihin na bumaba, nawala yung addict sa kanto, ganyan. Ito hindi. Kung mataas pa rin yung presyo ng bilihin, gutom pa rin ako. In a way, napaka-objective nung barometer as compared to ending criminality, what is even criminality to begin with.
But you can't fudge those numbers.
But I will only add that, for example, if you go back to 2018, we also had a very high spell of very high inflation, exceeding 6% in September of around 2018. And yet, Duterte's popularity ratings never wavered. Even with that, I mean, I would think that would maybe it wiggled a bit, but until the very end of the Duterte administration, it remained sky high. I mean, even with that episode, I would think that would have made a difference in public opinion, but there's nothing.
Ang suspect ako doon, JC, it wasn't long enough. So he did take a bit of a hit, but by 2019, you had oil prices globally dropping, and then of course, nag-drop na rin yung inflation.
Transitory.
And he had other cabinet members to take the blame, whereas Marcos is taking on the agriculture portfolio himself. So, diba, the buck stops with him here. Hindi niyo pa rin sinabi, kasi kasalanan ni agri-chief, ganyan. Siya yung agri-chief, siya yung in charge sa mga commodities na yan.
Okay, so we will continue the discussion on all these policies. What's coming out so far, of course, is that we have some priorities. We know the direction, but again, sparse on the details. For now, we have here with us Jules Giang, Raptor's head of community, to expound on the Atin ang Pilipinas agenda of the hashtag Courage On and the hashtag PH Vote coalitions. Jules?
Thanks, Sophia. Hello. Yeah, so the Courage On and PH Vote coalitions, which Rappler's community is leading, created a 5-point agenda for the candidates in the first quarter of 2022. And then we shared these to the public during the campaign season. So basically, it involves health, economy, education, environment and climate change, and human rights. So we repurposed this agenda and then we contextualized it to President Marcos. So overall, these 5 points were discussed by President Marcos earlier, except for human rights, of course. So very quickly, on health, it's good that he emphasized the direction to have access to healthcare, and particularly bringing specialty hospitals to the region. It's also good that he mentioned about access to affordable medicines. And he also touched on a bit about the welfare of the healthcare workers, but it would have been better if he fleshed out further about this. Kasi di ba yun yung pinaka-primary issue during the pandemic, yung welfare ng mga healthcare workers natin. And the economy naman, he started with the economy, obviously, and it only goes to show na ito yung pinaka-clear na he wants to address the economic crisis in the country. But the question here is, I guess the communities or the people, the public is asking right now, kailan, di ba? Kailan bababa yung mga presyo? Kasi yun naman yung pinaka-concern nila. Recently, we launched this 20 pesos challenge, basically asking people to just share online, ano na lang ba yung value ng 20 pesos. We have a story released right now, so you can check it out on the Rappler website. Yung value mismo, yung pinakatanong kailan mararamdaman ng mga tao yan. On education, the President mentioned about face-to-face classes, but the question here is, where is or when and where is the assurance of about the safety of students? The question here is, do we have the infrastructure? Do we have extra classrooms that will basically ensure the safety of our students? And another alarming point here is about the mandatory ROTC training. But I guess yung naging safety net niya dito is, aside from national defense preparation, binanggit niya nga na the training will also be used for disaster events. So yeah, for environment, very very broad yung nabanggit niya about the energy and about renewable energy. But I want to focus now on human rights. Our communities right now, our partner communities are reacting na no mention on indigenous peoples, for human rights, for justice and accountability about the killings during the Duterte administration. So I think it's quite expected din naman na we won't be hearing that during the SONA kasi he also credited the former president, di ba, in his speech. So that's the question. He also had no mention about the future of the Commission on Human Rights. Walang commissioners right now. So what's the future of CHR? That's a very important concern for our human rights defenders. But overall, I personally agree with JC, na we've heard about the targets, but the question right now is the hows. So I guess the first 100 days of Marcos is very crucial kung paano mag-flesh out yung mga directions coming from this SONA. And also I agree with Krista earlier from social media that this SONA was highly technical. Usually kasi SONAs are supposed to be laymanized, easily understood by the audience. But the technical side is usually given after the SONA through a technical report. But lastly, he also emphasized about the collaboration between public sector and the private sector. But when we talk about governance kasi, it includes civil society. So our question here is, how will the civil society be included in the next 6 years? So yeah, Sophia, that's from community so far.
Can I push back a little bit,
Go ahead.
Sophia? I think, respectfully, Jules, I think it's wrong to use the word assurance when it comes to going back to school, because as with any disease, there's no such thing as an assurance. It's all about mitigation. And yeah, we're not the most prepared country, but we're also not the least prepared country. Remember, globally, we're one of the last to reopen. And we have countries that are poorer than us, that have worse services than us, that have successfully reopened. And that is why the UNICEF essentially said that the Philippines has no excuse to keep their schools closed. Remember that if we're going to malls, there's a higher chance of transmission in malls than there is in schools. Globally, the data is very clear that schools are low transmission zones, and that's why the UNICEF thinks na unreasonable na yung policy natin. And also, the UNICEF also says that the learning loss is significant, and it's not worth it, especially if children are, they're not very vulnerable to the disease. And especially kung ang problema mo is seniors, then what we should do is stack up on molnupiravir, we should stack up on these medicines because may gamot para sa illness. And I don't think we should treat the illness the way we did in 2021 when we didn't have medicines for it. We have medicines for it.
I mean, just on your on that note, of course, interesting to note as well, you have this problem of keeping schools safe, yet you somehow manage to open businesses, other public spaces, but not schools,
Cinemas.
right?
Yeah.
Cinemas, gyms, other high risk areas.
Transmission risks there are higher than they are in classrooms, even in classrooms na puno. The data in the US shows is even in classrooms na masikip sa US, you open windows, mababa ang transmission rate as compared to other public spaces. So the UNICEF is encouraging the Philippines to reopen quickly.
I think something also interesting to note is the discussion about boosters is being framed with the lens of education, but we know that the people who need it most are older, the elderly, and there is no significant, I think, policy that would encourage more seniors to and other frontliners, high-risk people to take boosters. No, let's talk a little bit about what Jules mentioned. He mentioned, of course, the fact that human rights was not talked about during the speech, of course. Lian, two important institutions, the Commission on Human Rights and the PCGG. Of course, we know that it's in a sort of, if you want to call it, limbo phase, but how are officials there handling this period of uncertainty?
Sophia, the people at the CHR have been anxious for the last 1 month and probably more ever since, well, actually, before the Duterte presidency wrapped up, they have been anxious because they know that the entire board will be empty for when President Marcos takes office. And they are still anxious now because they don't know what's going to happen in the next months or even years. They have heard some rumors on who was going to be appointed as chair and even commissioner, but they cannot have an assurance now. So the anxiety will continue in CHR. In PCGG, I've heard from sources that there's already some names and they're just up for appointment by President Marcos. And it's the same as other officials of the DOJ institution. Just noting that Secretary Boying Remulla has not named some of many or all of his undersecretaries, although we know some of them because we've seen them, but he doesn't want to confirm them because they don't have appointment papers yet. So we also don't have a commissioner for immigration also. And the PCGG under Boying Remulla also has no chair. So I don't know, we're not sure why President Marcos is having a long time appointing or naming appointments to these commissions. We know that there's no shortage of those who want to apply. We know of some who want to apply. But I think it's also because it's very connected to the narrative of the Marcos family. Whoever will be appointed to the CHR will have to carry that legacy for Ferdinand Marcos. Whoever will be appointed at the Commission on Human Rights will be Marcos appointees, and the irony is very glaring there. They will serve the Marcos presidency as commissioners of an agency that was established precisely to correct or to fix or to address the human rights violations of his father. And to the PCGG also, it would be a large irony for you to serve a president whose father did all the corruption that you're being made to recover or to address. So I think that's why it's taking a long time. I don't think it's a shortage of applicants. We know of many applicants. We've heard names. They just can't confirm it yet. But I think it's largely to do with the complications of and the legacy that the PCGG and CHR will serve this Marcos presidency, Sophia.
Right, an important, interesting point that you're making now, the fact that it's not so much a question of whether or not these bodies will be abolished, but who will be there and how effective they'll really be in the mandate that they are supposed to perform, no? Aside from the CHR, of course, and the PCGG, an interesting trend, of course, the fact that there are several key positions that have yet to be filled. Pia, you covered President Duterte before at Malacanang. Do you find it, how are you finding, I guess, the fact that there are these empty positions compared to President Duterte and other previous presidents, perhaps? At this point in time, is it still unusual that several key positions are left unfilled?
Duterte was pretty fast with cabinet appointments. I remember he even held his first informal, unofficial cabinet meeting in May 31. So that's a month before his inauguration, right? So, and in comparison, diba, parang inauguration has come and gone for Marcos Jr. It's SONA already, and wala pa siyang health secretary, apart from an OIC, wala pa siyang Department of Human Settlements and Urban Development secretary, which is a new agency, which he already mentioned certain housing priorities. So it's really interesting or worrisome that he has priorities for these sectors, but no one in charge. Mm-hmm. And I guess that speaks volumes of where he's at. It's either he's very careful about who he appoints because it's such a priority sector, or wala siya mahanap who's willing or maybe who fits the qualifications he's looking for, or many other, diba? We don't know really why he's taking so long in appointing these very key officials. So lalo na yung pandemic, everyone's worried about that. And kasi when you appoint someone, right, that says a lot about what that department will be like down the road. Kasi it's going to be about who this person will bring as undersecretaries, the workhorses of that department. And so everything could change depending on who he will appoint after the SONA. But obviously, because he's the chief executive, whoever that will be naman will really have to follow what he laid out already in the SONA, which is why limiting siya kasi, di ba? Wala nang engagement with that person on how they envision that department. It will just really be based on what Marcos plans in his SONA because he already promised it to people.
Right. And kahit acting capacity yung mga, let's say, health secretary and other armed forces ngayon and everything, we also know that acting is still
functions
limited.
Pa lang yan.
Yeah. So, again, on the one hand, he has all these policies that he has laid out and Congress is there to take it up. But then, when it comes to implementing them, of course, that's where you'll see some of the limits to those visions that he mentioned. No? I also want to, before we close, before we wrap up, I want to talk about also or actually, do you think it's odd that with such one of the largest mandates, 31 million voters, that he's having a hard time filling these positions?
Ooh, that's a really tough question. Initially, it seemed like he struggled the most when it took a while for him to appoint the economic positions. And then the Diokno position came in, and that sort of, I think, reassured a lot of people, like, okay, Ben Diokno is there, I can join the cabinet. So that opened up all of these possibilities. And so what's surprising me now is at this point, actually, I was wrong, actually. I thought this cabinet would have a hard time establishing its credibility. But it established its credibility quite quickly from the Diokno appointment on. And I thought that after that, madali na lang magpasok na ibang tao dahil maganda yung reputation ng cabinet. So, as with you, Sofia, I'm confused as to why nahihirapan magpasok ng mga iba pa tao dito sa mga posisyon na to. Dahil marami talaga sa cabinet na mabango ngayon. At mabango yung cabinet ngayon. Not only is it the mandate of the president that might compel people to join the cabinet, it's the competence of the cabinet that ideally should be compelling people to join it. So I'm surprised bakit napapagala.
With the health department, I know that there are lots of names floated very early on, and a lot of these names were members of the advisory group of experts under the Duterte admin, people who were doctors who were advising the task force. So I'm not sure what he's weighing here. Kasi if in terms of willingness, maraming willing eh. Maraming ang naglalobby for that position. Interesting that he decided on an OIC first, and Vergere at that, who we know is really like talagang the face of the pandemic response under Duterte. She was really kind of an anchor, kind of like an adult in the room spokesperson who was very level-headed and very much respected by business people. And business people rin kasi want someone who's had experience during the pandemic, someone who was on the front line. So maybe he's looking for that perfect balance between expertise, maybe freshness, but also someone who's hunkered down in the front lines when it was the worst of the pandemic.
Right. No. So I mean, throughout the whole speech, it's like he mentioned a lot of the things that people wanted to hear. But at the end of the day, we're still looking for specific details, and of course, on the flip side, who the officials will be in charge to implement all of this. To close the discussion, the president said that, and I quote, "The state of the nation is sound." My last question to all of you, of course, that I want to ask is, name one word to describe the state of our nation. Do you agree with the word sound? JC, you can start with you.
Oh my. I think the state of the nation is not sound, or at least is not as sound as the president is painting it to be. There are a lot of risks. There's a lot of uncertainty, and he himself admitted that many of these are global in nature. But I think we need to be a bit more realistic, and we need to demand more from the present administration. What we have heard many macroeconomic numbers and figures, but many of these are just targets. and we need to hear about how the government will achieve these targets. And I think I just have to note as well that maybe the standards have gone down so much in the past couple of years that when the president is able to read in straight English or in straight Filipino, hindi nagmumura o alang papatayin. I think we're happy with that, quote unquote. But I mean, we have to raise our standards more in the coming years. And what better time to do that than start now?
Aloy?
I think it's okay. Relative to the Philippines, it's okay. I mean, the Philippines has never been really great, right? We've always been an unequal society, and even when we're growing, it's always been unequal. So, relative to where the Philippines has been, it's okay. And relative to the fact that we're still amidst a pandemic, it's okay. What keeps me up at night, actually, after this speech, and I'll segue a little bit, if you don't mind, kind of closing remarks about this, is that what keeps me up at night is the idea of a successful Marcos presidency. Because I think it's really possible, because he wants to right the ship, he has good economic plans, and as a Filipino, we should wish for that. But the reason why it keeps me up at night is because a successful Marcos possibility, which is to me becoming more and more likely, and when I say successful, I just mean like there's a certain level of stability. If that happens, then baka mabura na talaga yung nakaraan. And yun yung masakit dito. And that's what keeps me up at night. So I hope for, and I fear for a successful Marcos presidency.
Pia?
I think the nation now needs a real leader because it's hard to be president at this time. I mean, we have 13 trillion debt, we have a pandemic that's not over, and we have, rising food prices, things we can't control, things we can control. So many problems down the road. And yun nga parang when you go back to Marcos's main promise of unity, no? Parang, we heard all the good things in terms of the technical, economic aspect, pandemic, but what about democracy? Like, where are we in reviving trust in our institutions? Where are we in really like healing the wounds of such a divisive Duterte presidency? Accountability, the drug war, parang we haven't heard of any efforts towards that. And there are lots of us in society who believe that we can't really unify as a nation if we don't face these demons that haunted us in the past presidency.
Rambo?
Mahirap ng tanong mo, Sophia, but looking at the people's sentiment too, and with this SONA, ang lagi sinasabi is talagang we're a country that's still taking a chance at this point. And yun lagi sinasabi mga tao tungkol kay Marcos take a chance on him, hindi siya yung tatay niya. Pero kasi ito nga yun, napakaganda daw ng kanyang SONA, sabi ng marami, technical man, pero lahat ng kanyang sinabi, talagang mahirap mag-disagree. Pero mga nag-disagree, pero most of it talaga, maraming nag-agree. At ang problema at saka ang pahirap dito sa Pangulo ay kaya ba talaga niyang gampanan lahat ng kanyang sinasabi? Kasi yun naman talaga dapat ang gagawin ng Pangulo. Kung ano sinasabi niya, gagawin niya. At tayo, syempre, papatuloy natin gagawin natin, sisingilin natin ang Pangulo natin. At hindi lamang tayo mga media at saka mga eksperto, kundi dapat yung taong bayan din sisingilin si Marcos. Mahusay man yung kanyang pagsasalita today, dapat mahusay din yung kanyang paggawa. Sophia?
Tama, no? Lian, I'm giving you the last word.
Sophia, the state of our nation is bloody. Madugo. Again, let us not forget the number. 66 lawyers killed, 28 mayors and vice mayors killed, 427 human rights defenders killed, and 27,000 suspects killed in the war on drugs. And if it doesn't do anything about it, more blood will be spread across the country. We just saw 3 kahapon. The shooter was a supporter, the President Duterte supporter, and this might not be his own doing, but it was the doing of a president he supports and he is allied with. And if he were to be different from his father, he must stand for justice and end impunity.
Yes. And on that note, the ball is definitely in the administration's court, and we want to continue to challenge President Marcos. We have nothing but hopes for your term, for our collective success is on the line. May you look in the mirror and see a real public servant. This has been Rappler's coverage of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s first State of the Nation address. I'm Sophie Tomer Cruz with Pia Renada, Lian Buan, JC Punong Bayan, and Laloy Claudio. Good day.